The cold came for Lena the way a verdict does, fast, final, with everyone watching. She had known it was coming for 3 days. She had known the way you know a storm is near, not because you see it, but because every living thing around you goes quiet before it arrives. The birds stop, the air changes, and the people who used to greet you in the morning start looking past your shoulder, as though you are already gone. She stood in the center of the gathering ground with her hands at her sides and her chin level. The ground beneath her feet was frozen solid. She could feel the cold pressing up through the thin soles of her boots, traveling up her ankles and into her shins. Around her, the entire Coldmere pack had assembled in a wide half-circle. Over 200 people. Men and women, young and old, all of them dressed in their winter coats, their breath rising in small white clouds. None of them met her eyes. Not one. Elder Harrow stood at the front of the crowd, with a scroll in his hands that he did not actually need to read from. He had memorized the words. He had probably rehearsed them. He had the kind of face that enjoyed delivering bad news, not cruelly, but with a practiced solemnness that he had spent decades perfecting. His white hair was neatly combed back. His coat was pressed. He looked like a man who slept very well at night. He began speaking. Lena did not hear the words. She heard the sounds, the low official roll of his voice, the pauses he placed after each sentence to let the weight land, the rustle of the crowd adjusting their footing in the cold. But the actual meaning of the words came to her from far away, filtered through a kind of thick glass inside her skull. Banished. Weakest rank. Burden to the pack. Effective immediately. The Deadwood boundary. You are to go. She looked down at her boots. The left one had a lace that was fraying badly at one end. She had meant to replace it for 2 weeks but kept forgetting. The threads were coming loose in a slow spiral, and she counted them now because her mind needed something small and manageable to hold on to, while the rest of her life was dismantled in public. 3 threads still intact. 4 broken. The frayed end had started to curl. Elder Harrow finished speaking. Nobody moved. Lena raised her eyes from the bootlace and looked at the crowd for a moment. She did not look for a friendly face, because she already knew there was none. She did not look for her mother, because her mother had been placed in the second row, not hidden, but carefully positioned so that the distance was maintained. A respectful distance. A distance that said, she was yours once, but she is not yours now. Her mother's face was turned slightly to the left. Lena looked away from her mother. She looked at Elder Harrow instead, and she held his gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough that his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening in the jaw. He had expected her to look away first. Everyone always did. She was, after all, the weakest Omega in Coldmere's recorded history. She had been called that so many times over the course of her 22 years that the phrase had lost its weight entirely. The weakest Omega. It had become simply her name, the way some people are called the tall one or the quiet one. It was the first thing people said about her and the last thing they thought to say. She did not look away. And then she turned, without a word, and walked toward the tree line. The snow under her boots was packed hard from weeks of freeze. It made almost no sound when she walked on it, just a faint dry crunch, barely audible. She heard the crowd behind her, the shuffle of 200 people breathing and adjusting and watching her go. Nobody said anything. Nobody called after her. There was no ceremony to leaving, it turned out. No final words. No gesture of acknowledgement. She had lived here for 22 years, and she left the way you close a window, without ceremony, without the thing even being aware it was happening. The tree line of the Deadwood was 40 meters away. She walked toward it. 20 meters. She counted her steps without deciding to. The frayed lace on her left boot tapped the snow with each stride. The cold had already found the gap at her collar, and was working its way down the back of her neck. 10 meters. She was wearing 2 thin layers under her coat. The coat itself was old. The lining had torn at the left shoulder 2 winters ago, and she had never had it properly repaired. She had 5 pieces of dried food in her right coat pocket, which she had taken from her own shelf that morning before anyone was up. She had a small folding knife in her left pocket, the kind her grandmother had given her when she was 11, with a handle worn smooth from years of use. She had no map, because there was no map of the Deadwood that told you anything useful. She had no compass. She had a pack mark on the inside of her left wrist, the faint silvery line that all Coldmere members carried from the age of 7, and she had been told before leaving the house this morning that the mark would be ceremonially dissolved at the moment she crossed the tree line. She had wondered, briefly, if she would feel it, the dissolving. She reached the tree line. She stepped between the first two trees. She felt nothing, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing that had happened all day. The deadwood closed behind her. It was darker immediately. The trees here were old, the kind of old that has nothing to do with how many rings you count in the trunk, but with how they feel when you stand among them. They were tall and dense, their bare upper branches lacing together overhead, in a pattern that blocked what little gray light the winter sky offered. The cold here was different from the cold on the gathering ground. Out there it was open and sweeping. In here it was still, and stillness made it heavier. It sat on her shoulders. It pressed against her ears. She did not stop walking. The first thing she needed was elevation, high ground to see from, and to reduce her wind exposure before the temperature dropped further at nightfall. She had approximately 4 hours of gray light left. She knew this forest in the way that children who are left alone a great deal come to know the wild places near their homes, not in the way of a trained hunter or a skilled guide, but in the way of someone who has spent hundreds of hours sitting quietly in difficult places, because difficult places were more peaceful than the place everyone else called home. She moved through the trees at a steady pace, choosing her direction by the slight slope of the ground. Uphill. Always uphill first. The cold pressed harder. She passed a fallen oak that she recognized. It had come down in a storm 3 years ago, and she used to sit on it in late summer when she came here to be alone. Now it was buried under a foot of snow, barely visible, just a long white mound, with the ghost of bark showing through, where the wind had cleared a patch. She touched it briefly as she passed, one hand on the bark, just for a second. Then she moved on. She did not think about the gathering ground. She thought about the frayed lace on her left boot. She thought about where the nearest frozen stream was, and whether it would be running underneath the ice or sealed completely. She thought about her grandmother, who had died 12 years ago, and who had spent the last months of her life teaching Lena how to build a fire with wet wood, how to find the warmest side of a hillside, how to read the way animals moved through a forest, to understand where shelter and water were. At the time, Lena had not understood why her grandmother was teaching her these things with such urgency. She was 9 years old. She had assumed it was because her grandmother loved her and wanted her to know useful things. Later, much later, she had understood that her grandmother had known something, had seen something in the way the pack looked at Lena, and in the way Lena's mother kept a careful, anxious distance from her even then, as though closeness to Lena was a thing to be rationed. Her grandmother had understood what was being prepared for her granddaughter, and she had spent what time she had left, filling Lena with as much survival as she could hold. Lena had never decided how she felt about that. She did not decide now. She walked. The slope became steeper, and she adjusted her breathing, taking longer, slower breaths, managing her energy. Her ankle complained on the uneven ground. She had rolled it mildly 2 weeks ago, and it had never fully healed. She noted the complaint and filed it. Not a crisis, a factor. After an hour of walking, she found what she was looking for, a rocky outcropping on the north-facing side of a ridge, with a natural lean created by 2 large flat stones tilted against each other. Not a cave, not even close, but a space, low-ceilinged, with a partial floor of dry leaves that the snow had not yet reached because of the way the stones angled above it. She crouched and looked inside. No tracks, no scent of any animal having used it recently. The back wall was solid rock. She began to prepare. This was the part she did not think about. She did not narrate it to herself, did not find meaning in it, did not feel anything identifiable. She simply worked. She gathered the driest materials she could find, dead branches still holding to the underside of a fallen trunk, leaves that had packed dry in a sheltered hollow, several pieces of birch bark, which was the best fire-starting material in a cold forest because the oils in it burned even when damp. She arranged them inside the shelter, in the order her grandmother had shown her. Small at the center, larger outward, with just enough airspace between them. She took the folding knife from her pocket. She found a piece of dry hardwood and began to shave fine curls of it onto the center of her tinder pile. Shaving curls took time and precision. Her fingers were already stiff from the cold, and she worked them carefully, keeping her movements controlled. Rushing produced thick shavings instead of fine ones, and fine ones were what caught first. She worked for 11 minutes. She counted them. The fire caught on the third attempt, and she held herself very still while it fed on the birch bark, watching the small orange point grow, without adding anything to it yet, waiting until she was certain before she placed the first small branch. The certainty took another minute and a half. She waited the full time. The fire took. She sat back on her heels and watched it for a moment. The warmth reached her face first, a small, tentative touch of heat against cold skin. She held her hands out toward it. Outside the shelter, the wind had picked up. She could hear it moving through the high branches overhead, a low, continuous sound like something breathing from a great distance. The sky through the gap in the stones had turned from gray to a darker gray that was closer to blue. The temperature, she estimated, had already dropped another 4 or 5 degrees since she had entered the forest. She was going to be fine tonight. She did not feel relief at this realization. She just noted it, the way you note that a door is locked or unlocked. A fact, a piece of information to be stored. She reached into her pocket and took out one of the 5 pieces of dried food she had brought. She ate it slowly, chewing thoroughly, because her grandmother had told her that your stomach works harder than you think when you are cold, and you need to give it something to work with. She drank a small amount of water from the bottle she had filled that morning before the gathering. The fire crackled. She added a larger branch. And then, in the orange flickering light of the fire she had built with her own hands, in a shelter she had found with her own eyes, surrounded by a forest that had been used as a death sentence for as long as anyone in Coldmere could remember, Lena did something she had not done in many years. She cried. Not loudly, not with her hands over her face or her body shaking, just a slow, quiet release, tears tracking down her cheeks one at a time, disappearing into the collar of her coat. She did not know, exactly, what she was crying for. For her grandmother, probably. For the 22 years of being the weakest thing in any room she entered. For her mother, turning her face away. For the frayed lace on her boot that nobody had ever thought to help her replace. She cried for perhaps 5 minutes. Then she stopped, in the same way she had started, without deciding to, without dramatic conclusion. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She added another branch to the fire. She picked up a flat gray stone from near the entrance to the shelter. It was roughly palm-sized, smooth on one side, and it reflected the firelight in a warm orange glow when she held it close to the flame. She turned it over in her hands. Her grandmother used to say that a stone was the most honest thing in a forest, because it did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. She set the stone down beside her. She looked at the fire. Outside, the temperature was still falling. She knew that by morning, it would be the kind of cold that had a sound to it, a silence so deep and so complete that the air seemed to crystallize around it. She had 5 pieces of food, minus the one she had already eaten. She had her knife. She had her fire. She had been told her whole life that she was the weakest thing Coldmere had ever produced. She looked at what she had built in less than 4 hours. She did not say anything out loud. She did not make any declaration or find any dramatic thought to anchor the moment. She just sat beside the fire she had built and breathed, slowly and steadily, while the deadwood settled into its long, brutal winter night around her. And she stayed alive. And that, she thought, was enough for now. She woke before dawn, not because of a sound, not because of the cold, which had settled to a degree that should have made sleep impossible, and had instead made it deeply heavy and strange. She woke because of the smell. It was there before she was fully conscious. A faint, sharp scent riding the air that came into the shelter from the east. Wood ash. But not her ash. Her fire had burned down to coals in the night, and the smoke from it was familiar, local, belonging. This was something else. This was older smoke, carried on the wind from a distance, mixed with something she could not immediately identify. She was sitting up before she finished the thought. She sat still for 30 seconds and breathed through her nose and tried to read what the air was telling her. The smoke was distant, at least 2 kilometers, maybe more. Whatever was burning was large enough to be worth noting, but not immediately threatening. She set it aside and turned her attention to the cold. The cold was a different problem entirely. During the night, it had become physical in a way that was almost like pressure. She could feel it on every patch of skin her coat did not cover. Her face, the backs of her hands, the strip of neck above her collar. When she exhaled, the breath frosted immediately and fell rather than rising. which told her the temperature was somewhere in the range that began to be genuinely dangerous for sustained exposure. She needed to do two things very quickly: feed the fire and move her body. She added wood to the coals, blowing gently on them until they caught, then added larger pieces while she moved her limbs in deliberate, steady patterns, arms across her chest, bending and straightening, rotating at the waist. Her grandmother's voice in her head: "Cold muscles make bad decisions. Warm them before you ask anything of them." It took 12 minutes for the fire to come back to a proper heat, and for her muscles to lose their wooden stiffness. She ate a second piece of dried food. She thought about water. The stream she had been tracking yesterday before she made camp was perhaps half a kilometer south and slightly downhill. She needed to reach it and determine whether it was running or frozen, and if running, how to access it without breaking through ice over moving water in sub-zero temperatures, with no one to pull her out if she went through. These were solvable problems. She packed her shelter carefully, not because she was sure she would come back to it, but because tidiness, in a survival situation, was a form of thinking clearly, and thinking clearly was the most valuable resource she had. She banked the fire, covering the coals with ash to hold heat and reduce smoke. She took her knife. She took the flat stone, for no reason she could clearly name, except that she had told it her name the night before, quietly, while the fire was low. She did not examine this decision. She stepped out of the shelter. The forest hit her like a door opening onto a second winter inside the first. The overnight cold had transformed everything. Every surface wore a thin glaze of ice: the bark of the trees, the dead grass at the foot of the rocks. Even the air itself seemed to carry tiny particles of ice that she could feel against her skin. The sky was pale and close, the color of an old pewter spoon, and offered no hint of warming. The forest around her was absolutely silent. She moved. The walk to the stream took longer than she had estimated. The overnight ice had made every surface treacherous, and she picked her way down the slope with careful deliberation, testing each step before committing to it. Her rolled ankle protested on the awkward angles but held. She kept her weight low, and her movements controlled. She found the stream where she expected it, a narrow cut through the hillside, barely 2 meters wide, its banks built up with ice that extended several feet from each edge. The center of the stream was still running. She could see the dark water moving under a thin skin of new ice in the middle channel, and she could hear it too, a low, continuous murmur beneath the silence of the forest. She crouched at the bank and found a stick and broke through the thin edge ice and drank from her cupped hand. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache. She drank 3 small handfuls, refilled her bottle, and sat back on her heels to think. She needed food. The dried pieces she had brought would last one more day if she was careful. After that, she needed to find what the forest offered, which in deep winter was limited, but not nothing. Her grandmother had taught her which tree barks were edible and which were medicinal. She knew how to find the dormant root vegetables that some plants stored underground through the winter. She knew where small animals denned and how to construct a simple snare from materials the forest provided. She was building a list in her head when she heard the sound. It was not a natural sound. She went still immediately, crouching lower, putting the stream bank behind her and the tree line in front of her eyes. She listened. The sound came again, a footstep on ice. Deliberate, not accidental, the kind of footstep made by something that was moving with intention. And then another, and then, at a slightly different angle, a second set of footsteps, 2 of them, moving parallel to the stream, coming from the north. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford. Instead, she processed the information quickly and made a decision. She moved to the largest tree to her immediate right and placed her back against it, making herself as small as possible behind its trunk. She drew her knife. Not because she planned to use it, but because holding it made her think more clearly. The footsteps came closer. Through the trees she could see movement now, 2 shapes, both large, moving fast through the forest with the kind of ease that comes from familiarity. These were not lost people. These were not frightened people. These were people who knew exactly where they were and exactly what they were doing. They were heading for her camp. She understood this a moment before they changed direction. A slight turn, a small correction that aligned them perfectly with the smoke trail from her banked fire. Someone had read her smoke. Someone had backtracked it. These were hunters, but not hunting animals. She moved, not running, Running in ice-crusted forest with a compromised ankle was how you ended up on the ground. She moved fast and low, weaving between trees, staying parallel to the stream where the ice gave her softer footing. Behind her, one of the two figures shouted something in a voice she did not recognize, not from Coldmere, not any voice she knew. They had spotted her movement. They were faster than her. She knew this almost immediately. Whatever they were, whatever pack they belonged to, they moved through the frozen forest, the way water moves through rock. Not by force, but by finding every available path. She could hear them splitting apart behind her, one moving left, one staying center, a classic split designed to cut off lateral escape. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they had her angle. She turned downhill, which was the opposite of her instinct, but the most logical choice. Downhill meant speed, even on compromised footing, and the slope ahead of her dropped sharply into a ravine that she knew from her summer visits was narrow enough to make a two-person approach difficult. She ran. Her ankle screamed. She pushed harder. The trees blurred past her on both sides, and the ground dropped, and she controlled the descent by grabbing at branches as she passed them, using them to check her speed, angling always downward toward the ravine. Behind her she heard breathing now, close enough that the gap was measured in seconds rather than minutes. She reached the ravine edge. It was a 4-meter drop to a frozen creek bed below. She did not stop to think about it. She went over the edge, grabbed a root that protruded from the frozen wall, let it take her weight for 1 second to slow her fall, then released and dropped. She hit the creek bed with both feet and rolled immediately, the way her grandmother had shown her, taking the impact across her shoulder and hip rather than her ankles. She lay still for 2 seconds. Then she was up. Her shoulder throbbed. Her ankle was not happy. She was up anyway, and moving along the creek bed, keeping close to the ravine wall, staying in the shadows. Above her, at the ravine edge, she could hear the two figures stopping. She heard them speaking, low, and in a dialect she recognized as belonging to the Ashen Ridge pack, Coldmere's oldest rival, and the pack whose territory bordered the northern Deadwood. They were not supposed to be here. This stretch of the Deadwood was unclaimed territory, a buffer that had existed by mutual agreement for decades, because neither pack wanted the cost of defending it against the other. But apparently someone had decided the agreement no longer suited them, and apparently they had sent scouts. And apparently those scouts had decided that an Omega alone in the winter forest was worth investigating. She did not let herself think about what investigating meant. She moved. The creek bed gave her speed on the frozen surface, but it also gave her no cover. She was exposed from above. She needed to get off the creek and back into the trees, before the Ashen Ridge scouts found a way down. She could see, 50 meters ahead, where the ravine wall had partially collapsed, creating a rough slope of frozen earth and rock that could be climbed. She reached it. She climbed. It was not graceful. Her hands found whatever they could, a frozen root, a protruding rock, a wedge of packed ice that she tested before trusting. Her shoulder screamed with every pull. Her ankle screamed with every push. She went up anyway, and the going was slow enough that she could hear the scouts moving above, and slow enough that she was certain, at one point, that they had found her. She pressed herself against the ravine wall and held completely still. Above her, footsteps. Close. One of them was moving along the ravine edge, directly above her position. She stopped breathing. The footsteps paused. Then, from somewhere to the north, far away, but unmistakable, a howl rose into the cold sky. Not from the two scouts. From something much larger and much more distant, but carrying a quality in it that she felt in her chest before she understood it with her mind. The footsteps above her started again, faster now, moving away. She heard the scouts calling to each other in short, terse exchanges. Then silence. Then nothing. She stayed against the ravine wall for another full minute, counting seconds, before she started climbing again. She reached the top of the ravine and lay flat on the frozen ground for 3 breaths. Then she got up. Whatever had just happened, whatever the howl to the north meant, she was still alive, and she was still in the Deadwood, and the sun, such as it was already beginning its short winter descent toward the tree line. She had survived the night. She had survived the morning. She looked at the flat stone she still held in her left hand. She had carried it through the fall, the run, the climb. She had not let go of it once. She did not examine this. She moved uphill, away from the ravine, and started thinking about where she was going to sleep that night. The third day in the Deadwood was the day Lena stopped counting the days. Not because she had lost track, she had not. She was precise about time in the way that people become precise about it when they have nothing but their own internal clock to rely on. She knew it was the third morning because she had marked 2 notches in the bark of the oak near her second camp, and she had made the third notch this morning with the edge of her knife before she had even taken a drink of water. She stopped counting because counting implied a destination, a number she was counting toward, a point at which the counting would end and something else would begin. And by the third morning she had understood that there was no such number. There was no point at which this ended. She was not waiting to go home, because she did not have a home to go back to. She was not waiting to be rescued, because nobody was coming. She was not waiting for anything. She was simply here. This understanding had arrived quietly, somewhere in the small hours of the second night, when the cold had settled to a depth that made sleep a strange half-waking thing, present enough to rest her body, not deep enough to lose consciousness of the forest. She had been lying on her side with her back to the small fire and her face toward the trees, and it had simply come to her, calm and without drama. This is not temporary. And with that thought, not despair, which surprised her. Something else. Something that felt almost like the absence of weight, a lightness she had not expected, which was the lightness of having no more things to lose. She ate her 4th piece of dried food and started moving before full light. Her camp for the second night had been less elegant than the first, a shallow hollow in the hillside, partially sheltered by a dense stand of young pines, whose low-hanging branches held off the worst of the wind. She had slept pressed against the earth, with the fire between her and the open air, and the earth's cold had seeped through her coat steadily all night. She was stiff this morning in a way that required serious work to undo. She moved methodically through the exercises her grandmother had drilled into her, not because she felt like it, but because the body was not a thing to negotiate with. It needed what it needed, regardless of how she felt about providing it. The stiffness retreated by degrees. She started north. North was the direction she had not yet properly explored, and it was also the direction of that howl from yesterday. She moved toward it for reasons she did not examine. Perhaps because anything with that much force in its voice knew something about surviving the Deadwood that she did not. Perhaps because sitting still in a forest that had already sent scouts for her was a worse option than moving toward the unknown. She tracked the stream she had found on her first morning, following it north where it led deeper into the forest, and the trees grew older and taller, and the canopy overhead thickened enough to reduce the snowfall on the ground. Here the going was easier. The packed forest floor held her weight, without the treacherous ice patches that had plagued the more exposed sections of hillside. She moved well for 2 hours. Then her ankle betrayed her. It did not happen dramatically. There was no moment of disaster, no crack in the ice, no sudden misstep. Her ankle simply decided, with great calm and no warning, that it was finished cooperating. On a gentle downward slope, between one step and the next, it gave out completely. She went down sideways, catching herself on both hands, her left knee hitting the frozen ground hard enough to leave a bruise she would not discover until the following morning. She lay there for a moment. Then she pulled herself to sitting and looked at the ankle. It was swollen, significantly so. The kind of swelling that meant the injury from 2 weeks ago had been aggravated beyond its tolerance, and something more serious had happened this time. She tested it carefully, pressing with 2 fingers along the outer edge of the joint, mapping where the pain lived. It was not a break, she was almost certain of that. The bone structure felt intact under the swelling, and she could move the joint, though movement produced a bright particular pain that made her breath catch. A bad sprain, perhaps a partial tear of one of the outer ligaments. This was a significant problem. She sat on the frozen ground and thought about it practically, which was the only useful way to think about it. She could not go far on this ankle, certainly not fast, which was a problem given that fast had saved her life yesterday. She needed to immobilize it as well as she could with what she had, and reduce the swelling through cold compression, which was a slightly absurd suggestion given that the entire world was currently cold, but the specific targeted application of it to the joint would help. She needed to find shelter and stay relatively still for at least 24 hours. She tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of her inner shirt. She wrapped the ankle firmly. not so tight as to cut circulation, but tight enough to provide support and compression. She laced her boot over it as snugly as she could manage. She cut a branch from a nearby sapling and tested it as a walking stick. She stood up. The ankle held. It was not comfortable. She was not looking for comfortable. She moved. She was making approximately half the speed she had managed before the fall. This was acceptable. This was a workable rate. She told herself this clearly, the way her grandmother used to say plain true things in a plain true voice, without extra emotion in either direction. It is what it is. Now manage it. She managed it. For the next hour she moved steadily north, using the stick, choosing her footing with more care than before, accepting the slower pace. The forest around her changed again. The pines gave way to a stretch of old mixed forest, oak and ash, and something she thought might be hornbeam, their bare branches so dense and interwoven overhead that the light fell through them in thin pale strips rather than anything you could call brightness. And then she heard them. 2 sets of footsteps. Not the same ones as yesterday. She was certain of that immediately. These were heavier, moving with more confidence, and the pattern of them was different. Yesterday's scouts had moved carefully, reading the ground as they went. These 2 moved as though the ground owed them passage. She stopped. She pressed against the nearest large tree, but she already knew it was not enough. She was on flat ground, in sparse undergrowth, with a compromised ankle and a walking stick that would not survive a run. She assessed the situation with the cold clarity that the last 3 days had burned into her, and she understood what she was looking at. She could not run. She waited. The 2 figures came through the trees ahead of her. She recognized the colors they wore even before she could make out their faces. Deep gray, with a dark green trim, the mark of Ashen Ridge, the same pack as yesterday's scouts. These were not scouts, though. Their build, their bearing, the way they moved, these were fighters. Trained and confident and very large. They saw her at the same moment she confirmed them. They stopped. There was a brief pause in which all 3 of them evaluated the situation. Then the nearer of the 2 smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that conveys a conclusion rather than a feeling. He said something to the other, low and sideways, and the second one responded with a short sound that might have been a laugh. Lena's hand tightened on the walking stick. She thought about the knife in her pocket. She thought about her ankle. She thought about the flat stone she was still carrying in her left coat pocket, its smooth side worn familiar against her fingers. She thought about her grandmother's voice, "When you cannot fight, and you cannot run, make yourself large." She straightened to her full height. She looked the nearer man directly in the eye. She said, clearly and without any tremor in her voice, "You are outside your boundary. This is unclaimed territory." The man blinked. It was a very small reaction, but it was there. He had not expected her to speak. He had not expected the voice she used, level, with no apology in it. His partner said something else. And then, from behind Lena, from the north, close, far closer than she had expected anything to be, a sound came that was not a voice, and was not an animal sound, and was not quite a howl. It was something between all 3, and it stopped everything. The 2 Ashen Ridge fighters went absolutely still. Lena did not turn around immediately. She watched the 2 men's faces change, and she learned something from what she saw there. She had seen fear before. She knew its specific texture. This was not standard fear. This was the kind that lives below the stomach, the kind that bypasses reason entirely, and speaks directly to the oldest part of the human body, the part that remembers, in some cellular depth, what it felt like to be a small creature, in a world that contained things much larger and more dangerous than itself. They were afraid of what was behind her. She turned. The trees were dense, and the light was poor, and at first she saw nothing. Then she saw him. He was standing approximately 20 meters away, between 2 large ash trees, perfectly still. He was watching her. She processed what she saw in pieces, the way the mind does when it encounters something outside its existing categories. Tall, significantly so, wide across the shoulders in a way that was structural rather than cultivated, the kind of build that comes from a life lived entirely in physical demand, rather than from any deliberate effort to appear powerful. He was dressed in winter clothes that were not designed to impress anyone, dark, functional, worn in ways that told you they had spent significant time in difficult places. His face was not the kind of face that any single word could settle on. It was angular and weathered, and entirely serious, and he was looking at Lena with an expression she could not read. He was not looking at the Ashen Ridge fighters. He was looking at her. She heard the fighters behind her. She heard their footsteps changing, the specific rhythm of people creating distance in a way they hoped would not appear rushed. They were retreating. Quickly, they were already 20 steps back and moving faster now, and she did not look away from the man between the ash trees to confirm it, because she already knew. The deadwood went quiet. The man did not move. Lena's ankle was pulsing with steady pain. She had been standing on it without the stick for the last minute, and she had not noticed until now. She shifted her weight slightly. He noticed. She saw his gaze drop to her ankle and return to her face, all in the space of a second. She did not know who he was. She did not know what pack he belonged to, or what he was doing in the unclaimed middle of the deadwood in the deepest part of winter. She did not know what that sound had been, the one that had turned two trained fighters into retreating men. She knew two things. He had not done anything threatening, and she was, for the first time in 3 days, more curious than afraid. She said nothing. He said nothing. They looked at each other across 20 meters of frozen, silent forest. His name was Kale. She did not learn this immediately. She learned it the way you learn most things in the deadwood, piece by piece, in order of necessity, with large gaps in between that were filled with nothing but the sound of wind and the work of staying alive. What she learned first was that he had a fire, a proper one, in a proper camp, in a shallow basin below the ridgeline that was sheltered from the wind on 3 sides by a natural arrangement of large rocks. The basin was maybe 10 meters across, and it had been used before. She could see the evidence of previous fires in the same stone ring at the center, the careful clearing of the ground, the organized stack of split wood against the largest rock. Somebody had been here for a while, or had come here more than once. He had not taken her there immediately. After the Ashen Ridge fighters had retreated and the silence of the forest had reasserted itself, he had looked at her ankle again, not in an examining way, just in a reading way, the way someone reads a situation to assess what it demands. And then he had said, in a voice that matched the rest of him, meaning it was quiet and direct and used no extra words, "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said. He had looked at her ankle a moment longer. "Can you walk quickly?" She had understood what he was asking, not whether she was capable of walking quickly in ideal conditions. Whether she could do it now, on this ankle, in this forest, if quickly became necessary. She considered the honest answer. Not for long. He had nodded, a small nod, the kind that does not indicate approval or disapproval, only acknowledgement. Then he had turned and walked north, and she had followed, because her options in that moment were limited, and following a person who had just made 2 armed scouts retreat without saying a single word was the most sensible of them. The walk to his camp had taken perhaps 15 minutes. He had not slowed his pace for her, but he had chosen a route that was navigable, avoiding the worst of the iced slopes, staying on ground that gave her ankle a fair chance. She did not know whether he had done this deliberately, or whether it was simply the route he would have taken anyway. She did not ask. He built up the fire from coals that were already banked and waiting, and the heat expanded into the basin immediately, and she sat down on a flat rock near the fire, because her ankle had been patient long enough, and was now demanding respect. She looked at the camp while he worked. It was a functional place, nothing extra, nothing wasted. There was a bedroll of thick, oiled material folded against the rock, a small pack that was clearly organized rather than just filled, a pair of tools hung from a wedged branch, a folding saw, and what looked like a short-handled ice axe. A small covered pot that sat near the edge of the fire. The rock walls were the color of iron in the firelight, and they radiated back the heat in a way that made the basin feel warmer than the fire alone could account for. She was trying to understand him from his belongings, the way you try to understand a text from its margins. He sat down on the opposite side of the fire. "You have been out here 3 days," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said anyway. He looked at the fire for a moment, then he said, "From Coldmere." Again, not a question. She found this less surprising than she might have, because the trail she had left from Coldmere's tree line was not subtle, and because she was wearing a coat with Coldmere's weave pattern, and because anyone who knew this forest would have connected her presence in the unclaimed zone to the smoke they must have seen on the first night rising from her fire. "Yes," she said. He did not ask why she was here. She did not offer it. He reached into the small pack and took out a wrapped piece of something and held it across the fire, toward her, without any preamble or commentary. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. It was meat, smoked and dried, wrapped in waxed cloth to protect it from the cold. It was significantly better than the dried provisions she had brought from Coldmere. She ate it slowly, in the way her body needed. He watched the fire. She studied him when she was certain he was not looking at her. He was perhaps 5 years older than her, which would put him in his late 20s. The weathering on his face said he spent the majority of his time outdoors in all conditions, and had done so for a long time. His hands, when she could see them near the fire, were the hands of someone who worked hard in cold places, the knuckles slightly scarred, the skin tough in the specific places where grip and friction lived. He did not fidget. He did not fill the silence. He sat with it, the way you sit with something familiar. She finished eating. She said, "What is your name?" He looked at her, and there was a brief, almost imperceptible moment of something in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it, as though people did not often ask him directly. "Kale," he said. She nodded. "Lena," she said. Another small nod. Information exchanged. Nothing more made of it. She looked at her ankle, which was still wrapped in the torn strip of her inner shirt. The wrapping had held through the walk, but it was not ideal, and she could feel the swelling pressing against the inside of her boot in a way that suggested she needed to loosen the lace before it became a circulation problem. She started on the lace. He watched without watching, the particular quality of attention that is not a stare, but is not the deliberate looking away of someone pretending not to notice either. She unlaced the boot, loosened the strip, pulled the boot off carefully. The ankle was not pretty. The swelling had progressed through the afternoon, and it was now visibly distorted, the joint thick and dark-colored against the pale skin of her lower leg. She heard him move. He came around the fire, crouched beside her without asking permission, and looked at the ankle. His hands were near it but not touching. He was not going to touch it without consent. She understood this immediately, and it told her something. "Press on the outside edge of the joint," he said. "The bone underneath. Tell me if it feels different from the other side." She did this. She pressed with 2 fingers along the outer edge, testing the bone structure the way she had before. "No," she said. "Same as the other." He nodded. "Then the bone is fine. The ligament on the outside is damaged. It needs 24 hours of being still and elevated." She looked at the camp. She looked at the forest outside the basin. "The Ashen Ridge Scouts," she said. "They will come back." "Not tonight," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because they know I am here," he said. "And they will not come where I am until they have sent for instructions. That takes time." She absorbed this. "Who are you?" she said. The fire crackled. He reached across and added a piece of wood to it, with a practiced economy of movement. "I told you my name," he said. "That is not what I asked." He looked up at that. This time the expression was clearer, the same thing she had seen when she asked his name. The particular look of a man who is surprised by directness, the way other people are surprised by rudeness, as though he was not accustomed to being spoken to plainly. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I am the Alpha King of the Northmere Federation." The fire crackled. A piece of wood settled. Lena looked at the tin pot near the fire's edge and noted that it contained something that smelled like pine needle broth, which was good for inflammation, and she thought that whoever had taught him about pine needle broth had given him something genuinely useful, and she thought about her grandmother, who had taught her the same thing, and she thought about the fact that she was sitting in a basin in the middle of the deadwood, on a compromised ankle, opposite the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Territories, having just eaten his food and corrected his assessment of what she could manage on a bad ankle. She took the flat stone out of her pocket. She turned it over in her hands. "You are a long way from Northmere," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He looked at the fire. Outside the basin, the deadwood was fully dark now, and the cold was the kind that had no argument in it, just weight and depth, and the quiet insistence of it pressing against everything alive, and daring it to keep going. She kept going. She held the stone. And in the warmth of a fire she had not built, in a camp she had not made, opposite a man whose name meant danger in 5 different territories, Lena sat very still and felt, for the first time in 3 days, something that was not survival. She did not have a word for it yet. She left it unnamed. That seemed right. The pine needle broth was not good. She drank it anyway, both hands wrapped around the tin cup, feeling the warmth transfer through the metal into her palms in slow degrees. The taste was sharp and medicinal, and she swallowed it without complaint because the anti-inflammatory properties were real, and her ankle needed all the help it was getting. Cale had made it without being asked. She had not seen him gather the needles or add them to the water, but when she had looked up from unwrapping her ankle, the second time that evening, the pot had been moved closer to the fire, and the smell of pine had joined the wood smoke. He had poured her a cup and set it on the rock beside her without any accompanying explanation or offer of sentiment. She drank it. He sat across the fire with a stillness she found, increasingly, to be distinct. It was not the stillness of someone restraining themselves. It was not the stillness of someone performing calm. It was the stillness of someone for whom the present moment was genuinely sufficient, who did not need the fire to be anything other than warm, who did not need the silence to be filled, who did not need her to perform any particular gratitude or discomfort or conversation. It was the most comfortable she had felt in 3 days. This made no sense, given that she was drinking bad broth across from the man the Northern Territories called the most feared alpha king alive. It made perfect sense, given that fear had never been among her primary responses to things. She had been afraid in the ravine yesterday. She had been afraid on the frozen creek bed. She had been afraid for 12 consecutive years of being the thing Coldmere looked past. But sitting here, in the firelight, in a camp that was tight and functional and warm enough, opposite a man who had not done anything except be precisely as large and quiet as he actually was, she was not afraid. Curious, still. Curious was her default state in the presence of information she did not yet have. She said, "Why are you in the deadwood?" He added a branch to the fire. The branch caught immediately, the way properly dried wood does. No hesitation, no gradual build. It just took. "Checking the boundary," he said. She turned the cup in her hands. "The Ashen Ridge boundary?" "Yes. They are expanding into the unclaimed zone." "Yes." She looked at the fire. "Is that why they sent scouts into the deadwood?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was not avoidance but thinking. "Partly," he said. "The unclaimed zone has something they want. There is a water source in the northern section, a spring that runs year-round even in the deepest winter. They have been pushing their boundary markers toward it for 2 seasons. She thought about the scouts. Their direction of travel, the way they had moved with purpose toward her camp rather than wandering. They were not looking for the spring, she said. They were looking for whoever made that fire. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She nodded. They thought the spring was being claimed, or that someone was using the zone to move through without agreement. Either reason gives them justification to press the boundary further. She absorbed this. It was the kind of territorial politics that her pack had been navigating her whole life. From the outside, she had never been considered important enough to be included in the discussions about it, but she had listened. She had always listened. Listening was what you did when nobody thought you were worth talking to. "And you," she said, "what justification do you have for being here?" The fire moved. Something in the coals settled. He looked at her steadily, and there was something in his expression, not quite humor, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone encountering a question they were not prepared for. "The same justification everyone claims in unclaimed territory," he said. "Presence." She looked at him. "That is not a justification," she said. "That is a description." The adjacent to humor thing in his expression deepened slightly. "No," he said. "It is not a justification." She drank the last of the pine needle broth. The fire was good. The basin walls reflected the heat efficiently, and the cold outside barely registered here. Her ankle, elevated on a folded section of his bedroll that she had not asked for, and that he had placed without ceremony, had reduced its swelling, degree by degree, through the evening. She had tested it an hour ago, still painful, still swollen, but the acute distortion had subsided. She said, "How long have you been out here?" 5 days. She considered this. 5 days in the deadwood in winter was not a journey. It was a decision. You did not stay 5 days in the deadwood without intent. You came alone? She said. Yes. She turned the empty cup in her hands. That is not a small risk, even for the most feared alpha king alive. He was quiet for a moment. You know who I am, he said. I knew who you were before you told me, she said. I said I was from Coldmere. Coldmere shares a border with your territory. I have known your name since I was 12 years old. He looked at the fire. Then you know the stories. I know some of them, she said. I do not know how many of them are true. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was not going to answer. Then, some. Which ones? He glanced at her. It was a brief look, measuring in a way that was not threatening but was very deliberate. The one about the Foulcrest Pack, she said. 3 years ago. The agreement that stopped the northern border conflict. Was that you? A pause. Yes. The stories say it was settled through force. The stories are incomplete, he said. Force was part of it. The rest of it was 3 months of negotiation that nobody tells stories about, because it involved a great deal of sitting in cold rooms and arguing about water rights. She almost smiled. She caught the expression before it fully arrived, not because she was suppressing it but because it surprised her. She had not almost smiled in 3 days. She had not, honestly, almost smiled in considerably longer than that. She set the cup down on the rock. What happens tomorrow? She said. He understood what she was asking. Not what happens generally. What happens to her, specifically, with her compromised ankle, and her single remaining piece of dried food, and the Ashen Ridge scouts who would, as he had said, eventually receive their instructions and return. He was quiet for a moment. If you can walk, he said, we move north, past the unclaimed zone, into neutral ground. There is a boundary station on the edge of Northmere territory, medical supplies, a proper shelter, hot food. She heard the, if you can walk. She noted what came with it and what did not. No offer to carry her, no suggestion that she was a burden to be managed, just the conditional, stated plainly, if you can. And if you could not, presumably, they would address that as a separate problem. I can walk, she said. Tomorrow, he said, not tonight. She looked at him. Tonight, you rest the ankle, he said. It was not an order. It was a reading of the situation stated aloud. The kind of thing you say when the obvious thing is true and needs to be confirmed rather than argued. She lay back against the rock wall behind her, pulling her coat close. Her ankle, elevated, pulsed with a steady, manageable rhythm that she had already mostly learned to ignore. The fire settled. Outside the basin, she could hear the wind moving high through the treetops. Not close, not personal, but continuous, like something that had been happening since before she existed and would continue long after. KL, she said. Yes. The Northmere Federation. You govern it alone? A long pause. I have people, he said. A council, lieutenants, a pack structure, the same as any other. But the decisions are yours. The final ones, he said. Yes. She thought about this. What it meant to carry the final decisions. To be the place where everything stopped. Does it get heavy? She said. The fire moved. He was quiet for a while. Long enough that she thought, again, that he was not going to answer. Then, yes. Just the one word, but the way it landed told her everything about how seldom he said it out loud. She looked at the ceiling of the basin, the open sky above the rock walls, navy black and scattered with stars that burned fiercely in the frozen air, the way stars do when there is nothing between them and you. She could see perhaps a third of the sky from where she lay. It was enough. She thought about what it meant to be carried by a different kind of strength than the one you built yourself. To rest inside something that was not your own making, even for one night. She thought about how strange it was that the Deadwood, the place that was supposed to be her ending, had given her this instead. A fire she had not built, a broth she had not made, a night in which the cold was, for once, on the other side of something solid. She turned the flat stone over in her hand. Once, twice. Then she closed her eyes. She did not sleep immediately, but she rested, which was not the same thing, and was, right now, enough. In the morning, she would walk north. In the morning, everything would be different. For now, she held the stone, and the fire burned between them, and the stars above the basin were impossibly bright, and Lena lay still in the deadwood, and let herself be, for once, exactly where she was. She woke to the sound of the fire being built. Not the fire dying, the fire growing. New wood added carefully, the deliberate spacing of someone who understood how heat moved through a fuel arrangement, rather than just piling it on. She lay still for a moment, and listened to it, and did not open her eyes immediately. She was aware of her body. Ankle, improved. Not good, but improved. The swelling reduced overnight, in a way the rest and the pine needle broth had produced. Back, stiff from the rock surface, but not painfully so. Hands, cold in the specific way that extremities go cold overnight, when the fire you are sleeping near burns low, but functional. She opened her eyes. The basin was pre-dawn gray. The sky above the rock walls had shifted from black to the color of iron shavings, and the stars had faded to the brightest ones only. She could see Cale on the far side of the fire, crouched, arranging the wood with the same economy of movement she had noticed the evening before. He had not looked up when she opened her eyes. She did not think he knew she was awake. She sat up slowly. He glanced over. "How is the ankle?" he said. "Better," she said. She tested it, rotating the joint in careful degrees. Better was accurate. Better was not the same as functional for long distances in challenging terrain, but it was the honest assessment. He stood up and went to the small pack and produced 2 wrapped portions of the smoked meat, setting one on the rock beside her without looking at her, and taking the other for himself. She ate hers, while she worked the ankle joint through its available range, gentle and repetitive, working the stiffness out the way you work stiffness out of anything, not by forcing it, but by insisting, repeatedly, that it move. They ate without speaking. When she finished, she looked at the camp. He was already methodically undoing it, the bedroll compressed and strapped, the tools returned to the pack, the wood stack left as it was since you did not carry more than you needed in the deadwood. You left it for whoever came next. He worked fast and without wasted motion. She stood. She tested the ankle with weight. It held. The pain was present but manageable, a dull, persistent complaint, rather than the sharp corrective shout of the day before. She found her walking stick where she had left it propped against the rock wall. "We go north," he said, not looking up from packing. "Roughly 12 kilometers to the boundary. The first 4 are the worst. The terrain is broken, and there is a section of frozen slope that we will need to route around. After that it is easier." She absorbed this. 12 kilometers on a compromised ankle over broken terrain was not a small thing. It was not beyond her. She did not say either of these things. "How long?" she said. "At a reasonable pace," he said, considering it. 7 hours, perhaps 8. She nodded. "We should go," she said. He looked at her for the first time that morning. A brief, assessing look that she was already learning to read. It was not skepticism. It was calibration. He was checking whether her assessment of her own capability matched what he was seeing. Whatever he saw, he nodded. They left the basin. The morning was the coldest she had experienced yet. The temperature at this hour, in the deep middle of the deadwood, had a texture to it. Not just cold, but dense. The air thick with ice crystals that caught the first pale light of dawn and turned it into something that was almost luminous. Her breath frosted immediately, and she could feel the inside of her nose contract with each breath, which was the deep cold indicator she had been tracking since her first day here. She walked. He set the pace, slightly slower than his natural stride, she could tell, because there were moments when his pace stuttered slightly, as though catching up to a decision to stay back. He did not make a production of this. He simply walked at the speed the situation required, and expected her to do the same. She matched it. The first hour was the hardest on the ankle. The terrain was exactly as he had described, broken and uneven, with sections of ice-covered slope that required diagonal traversal, each step chosen deliberately. She used the stick. She managed it. By the end of the first hour, her body had found the rhythm of it, the specific pattern of compensation that injured limbs learn when they have to, the slight adjustment in how she carried her weight and used the stick, the micro-decisions that became automatic. They did not speak much. What conversation they had was practical. He told her when a section ahead required a different approach. She told him twice when she needed to stop to rest the ankle, and she told him plainly, without apology or excessive explanation, and he stopped without comment. Once, she noticed him looking at the sky through the trees, and she followed his gaze, and saw what he had seen, a particular quality of cloud building to the west that suggested weather moving in. "Snow," she said. "Before midday," he said. "We need to be past the slope section before it arrives." They moved faster. The slope section arrived at the 3-kilometer mark, and it was worse than she had imagined it from his description. A long diagonal face of frozen earth and exposed rock, angled at roughly 30 degrees, with the ice having built up over weeks of freeze-thaw cycle, into a surface that gave almost no purchase. To the left of the slope, a dense stand of young trees offered handholds. To the right, the drop at the bottom was steep enough to be a problem. Cale looked at the slope, then he looked at her ankle. She looked at the slope. "I will take the stick," she said. "You take the left side. I will stay right of center, and use what handholds I can from the tree edge." He looked at her. She looked at him. She had the specific feeling of being evaluated and being found, for once, satisfactory. He said, "Stay diagonal. Do not commit your weight to any step before testing it." "I know," she said. He went first. She watched him cross. He was not graceful on it. The slope was too treacherous for grace. But he was efficient. Each movement deliberate. No wasted motion. His body low and balanced. He reached the far side and turned and stood there. She started across. The first 3 steps were manageable. The ice was thick but not glassy. There were surface irregularities she could find if she looked for them. She worked the stick ahead of her to test before stepping, keeping her weight centered. The ankle protested but cooperated. Step, test, shift, step. Halfway across she found a section that the ice had built up into a slight lip, barely a centimeter, but enough to catch the edge of her boot and redirect it. She felt the boot slide. She did not fall. She caught herself on the stick, planted it hard, threw her weight against the slope to kill the slide. Her left hand grabbed the nearest tree branch from the left edge, and she hung there for a moment, neither sliding nor moving, suspended between the branch and the stick, while her heart processed what had almost happened. She breathed. She readjusted. She crossed the remaining ground and stepped off the slope onto stable earth, and stood for a moment with her hands on her knees. Cale said nothing. He did not say well done. He did not say you made it or are you all right, or any of the things that would have framed the last 30 seconds as remarkable. He simply stood there, and when she straightened up he turned and continued walking north, and she fell in beside him, and they went on. She liked this about him more than she could reasonably explain. The snow arrived at the 4-kilometer mark, not a heavy fall, but a serious steady one, the kind that accumulates fast, and changes the character of the forest from cold but navigable to cold and visually complicated. The trees disappeared into white about 20 meters out, and the ground became a question you asked with each foot. "There is a way station," he said, from beside her, "an hour out. Stone walls. We can wait out the worst of it there." "How far to the boundary after that?" 5 kilometers. She calculated. If they waited out the worst of the snow at the way station and moved after, they would arrive at the boundary in late afternoon, rather than mid-afternoon. The difference was meaningful in terms of remaining light. "How long does it usually last?" She said, "The weather front." 2 to 4 hours, he said, "usually." She accepted this. The way station was a single-room stone structure, built into the side of a hillside, barely large enough for 3 people to stand comfortably. It had a door that functioned, and a fire pit with a smoke hole in the roof, and a small stock of dry wood in a sealed box against the inner wall. She recognized it as one of the old neutral ground shelters that had been maintained by mutual agreement between the neighboring territories for longer than anyone currently living remembered. They went in. He built the fire. She sat against the wall and worked the ankle through its range while the fire took hold. The small room warmed quickly. The stone walls held heat in a way that the open basin had not. She felt the cold beginning to release its hold on her coat, on her face, on the backs of her hands. It was a slow release, and she stayed still for it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He was adding wood to the fire. "Yes. Yesterday, when you came out of the trees, before I saw you." She paused. "You made a sound." He looked up. "What was it?" she said. He looked at the fire for a moment. "A signal," he said. "To my people." to let them know the situation in this zone had changed, and that I was holding position. She absorbed this. Your people can hear that, from that distance? From considerably further, he said. Those who have been trained to hear it. She thought about this, about the way the two Ashen Ridge fighters had reacted, the full-body stillness of it, the immediate and total retreat. They had not just heard a signal, they had heard a specific signal, belonging to a specific source. They had known exactly who it was, from sound alone. The stories say that no pack has gone to war with Northmere in 11 years, she said. That is true, he said. Because of you. He was quiet. Because of what it would cost them, he said finally. She looked at him. There is a difference, she said. He met her gaze. Yes, he said quietly. There is. The fire burned between them. Outside, the snow fell. She could hear it against the stone walls, a soft, continuous sound like something very gentle, being very insistent. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the flat stone. He watched her turn it in her hands. What is that? He said. She looked at it. The smooth side caught the firelight and held it in a warm amber pool. Honest company, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the fire, and there was something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not quite a smile, something quieter than a smile, something that lived in the same neighborhood. The snow came down. The fire burned. She held the stone. And they sat together in the stone way station in the middle of the deadwood, two people who had nothing in common, except that they were both, in their very different ways, exactly where they had chosen to be. And neither of them, for once, had any desire to be somewhere else. The snow stopped at midday. Not slowly, the way snow usually stops, thinning over an hour, the flakes spacing out and lightening until they are more absence than presence. This snow stopped, as though a decision had been made. One moment it was falling hard and white, and the next the air was clear, and the world outside the way station door had been remade entirely. Every surface buried, every edge softened. The forest transformed into something that looked like it had been drawn by someone who only knew winter in theory, and had made it perfect. Lena opened the door and stood in it for a moment, reading the changed terrain. The accumulated snow was mid-calf in the open sections, and deeper in the hollows and beneath the trees. Her boot situation was not ideal. The boot with the compromised ankle had been absorbing cold through the night, and she could feel the difference in circulation on that side. She tightened the lacing, which helped, and stepped out. Kale came out behind her, adjusting the pack. The deep snow will slow us, she said. Yes, he said, but it will slow the Ashen Ridge scouts equally. She had not mentioned the scouts in several hours. She noted that he was still thinking about them. Is that who you are worried about? She said, or is there something else? He was quiet, adjusting the pack straps. The boundary line, he said. Ashen Ridge has been moving their markers. When we cross into what they consider their extended zone, they may respond. She considered this. The neutral zone does not end cleanly, she said. They cannot draw a clear legal challenge if we are in the unclaimed section. He looked at her. You know territorial law, he said. It was not quite a question, but it had the texture of one. I know enough, she said. I listened to the Pack Council argue about the northern border for 10 years. It covers the same issues your scouts are dealing with here. He held her gaze for a moment. The Foulcrest Agreement, he said. The one you mentioned last night. You knew the details of it. The outline, she said. I knew the outcome and the parties. Not many people know the parties, he said. Coldmere is not directly involved in that treaty. He looked at the snow-covered forest and found the uphill direction and began walking. Coldmere is involved in everything that touches the northern territories, just not officially. Information that matters never stays in the room it was discussed in. It travels. She heard him fall in beside her, his footsteps joining hers in the deep snow. You were not given that information officially, he said. No one ever gave me anything officially, she said. I found things. I listened. I read what people left out as much as what they said. He was quiet for a moment. And what did they leave out? He said, about the Foulcrest Agreement. She thought about how to answer this, about what she actually knew, versus what she had inferred, versus what she had understood, from the gaps in the conversations she had heard pieces of through the years. The water rights section. she said. It is not in the written agreement. It was a side arrangement, separate document, limited witnesses. Coldmere's Border Council spent 6 months trying to determine whether it existed and what it contained. He said nothing. She took that as confirmation. The spring in the unclaimed zone, she said. Is it connected? He was quiet for longer than any of his other pauses, long enough that she knew she was close to something real. The Falcrest Agreement created a framework, he said, for future disputed resources. The spring is the first test of that framework, and Ashen Ridge is testing it by moving their markers. Yes, which means if Northmere holds the framework and enforces the boundary, the entire northern territorial structure stays intact. And if Northmere does not, every agreement in the northern territories becomes negotiable, he said. She walked. The snow under her boots was heavy but manageable. She found that high-stepping through it was more efficient than trying to push through it, and she adjusted her stride accordingly. The ankle noticed the increased demand but accepted it. She thought about what he had said. That is why you came alone, she said. Not because one person is safer in the Deadwood. You came alone because bringing people makes it a declaration. Being here alone makes it a presence. He looked at her. She looked back. Presence, she said, not a justification. Just presence. Something shifted in his face. It was very small, and she would have missed it if she had not been watching closely. Yes, he said. She nodded and returned her attention to the forest ahead. They walked for an hour through the transformed, silent landscape before she heard anything. The sound was subtle, a compression in the snow somewhere to the left, possibly animal, possibly not. She did not react visibly. She shifted her grip on the walking stick and looked at the tree line to her left in the most indirect way she could manage. She caught the shape. One person, positioned behind a large pine about 40 meters out, barely visible in the white-on-white of the snow-covered forest. Not moving. Watching. She said, at normal conversational volume, 3 o'clock, 40 meters, stationary. Cale did not alter his pace or direction. Yes, he said. I saw them 6 minutes ago. She felt a brief, odd warmth at this, not at being observed, but at being informed. He had not decided to manage the information or protect her from it. He had confirmed it. 1, she said. 2, he said. The second is farther back, moving parallel, a relay position. She absorbed this. They are reporting our position. Every quarter hour, he said. Standard Ashen Ridge Scout protocol. She considered the options. They were being tracked, but not engaged. Whoever had sent the scouts had decided on observation rather than confrontation. The reason for that decision was either prudence or waiting for reinforcement. How far to the boundary? She said. 2 kilometers. And the Ashen Ridge forward position? 600 meters south of the boundary line. She thought about this. If we increase our pace, she said, we reach the boundary before they can get a response from their forward position. Yes, he said, but the terrain ahead includes a section where pace will cost you the ankle. She did not reply immediately. She thought about the ankle and what it was doing and what it had managed today and what she was asking it to do next. She thought about what losing the ankle in the final 2 kilometers actually meant as a practical problem. I will tell you when the pace is too much, she said. I will not tell you before then. He looked at her. All right, he said. They moved faster. The terrain ahead did what he had predicted, uneven under the snow, with sections where the ground had been eroded by previous seasons and then disguised by the new fall. She found each one by feel, by the way the snow compressed differently over solid ground versus the edge of a hollow. She stepped around 3 bad sections that she would have gone through if she had not been paying the specific attention that came from walking on an ankle that could not afford a second mistake. The scouts kept pace. The boundary was marked by a series of stone posts, old, weathered, planted at intervals of roughly 20 meters through the trees. They emerged from the forest into a slightly cleared section of ground, where the posts were visible, their tops just rising above the new snow, like fingers reaching through from below. She stepped across the boundary line without ceremony. Cale stepped across behind her. Nothing happened. She let out a breath she had not entirely been aware of holding. Cale turned and looked back toward the tree line they had come through. The 2 scouts were visible now, both of them stationary at the deadwood edge, watching, not crossing, not approaching. They had reached the end of their mandate. He looked at them for a moment. Then he turned north. "An hour more," he said. "The boundary station is an hour north." She started walking. Her ankle was at the precise edge of its tolerance. Not beyond it. She had meant what she said, she would have told him. But at the edge. She could feel the edge the way you feel the edge of anything that is close to its limit. A particular quality of resistance. A slight hardening of the complaint into something more insistent. 1 hour. She could do 1 hour. She focused on her breathing, and her footing, and the flat stone in her pocket that she had not touched since the way station, because both hands had been occupied, but that she was aware of the weight of, its smooth, familiar density against her hip. She thought about the scouts reporting their position, about the instructions they would send back, about the Ashen Ridge territory, and the spring, and the framework that Cale had come alone to protect. She thought about a man who carried the final decisions, who had come into the Deadwood by himself to be a presence instead of a declaration, who had made pine needle broth without being asked, and crossed an icy slope without making anything of it, and confirmed the position of scouts rather than managing her away from the information. She thought about her grandmother, who had known something about Lena before Lena knew it about herself. She walked. The boundary station appeared through the trees at the end of the hour. A substantial building, much larger than the way station they had sheltered in. Stone construction, with a proper chimney and a supply cache, in an attached structure, and what looked like, as they got closer, a water source from a piped natural spring running into a covered stone basin. There was a light in the window. She stopped. "Someone is here," she said. "Yes," he said, "my people. I sent word ahead this morning before you were awake." She looked at him. He was looking at the station. "You sent word," she said, "from inside the Deadwood." "With no communication tools that I saw." He looked at her. "The signal," she said. "The one this morning, before dawn." "Yes," he said. She thought about the sound she had heard through the wall of the way station, before she had fully woken. She had catalogued it and set it aside and not examined it. Now she examined it. "You sent them instructions," she said, "for when we arrived." "For when you arrived," he said. "Medical attention, proper food, a room." She looked at the station. A person had appeared in the doorway, a woman, compact and efficient-looking, who was watching them approach with the attentiveness of someone who had been waiting, and was not surprised. Lena looked at Cale. He was looking at the station again, not at her, but she could see in his profile the same thing she had seen beside the fire last night, when she had asked him if it got heavy, that quiet, particular expression. She did not say thank you. She had understood by now that he did not want that what he had done was not an act requiring acknowledgement. It was simply what the situation had required, and he had provided it. She said, "The spring here, is this the same source as the disputed one in the unclaimed zone?" He looked at her, and the expression shifted into something that was almost, genuinely, a smile. "No," he said, "different aquifer." "Good," she said. "Then I can drink it without becoming politically complicated." He looked at her for another moment. Then he walked toward the station. She followed. The warmth from the doorway reached her before she crossed the threshold. Real warmth, the kind that meant a proper fire and thick walls, and the accumulated heat of a building that had been inhabited and heated for hours. The woman in the doorway stepped aside to let them pass, and looked at Lena's ankle with the practiced eye of someone medically trained. "Water first," the woman said, not to Cale, to Lena. Lena looked at her. "Water," the woman repeated, calm and certain. "Then the ankle. Then food. In that order." Lena sat down in the nearest chair. She was, for the first time in 4 days, inside. She looked at the room around her, the stone walls holding warmth, the fire burning with proper seasoned wood, the table with actual provisions on it, the window through which she could see the last light of the winter afternoon turning the snow-covered forest a pale blue gold. She reached into her pocket. She took out the flat stone and set it on the table beside her. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the window. The Deadwood was behind her now, visible through the glass as a distant dark tree line against the dying light. 4 days ago she had walked into it with 5 pieces of dried food and a fraying bootlace, and every single person she had ever known looking at the ground. She was looking at the window, and the Deadwood was looking back. Her name was Petra. Not what Lena had expected, which was not the same as saying she had expected anything. She had been too tired on arrival to form expectations about the woman who had told her to drink water first. But Petra was the kind of name that suited someone who moved the way this woman moved, which was efficiently and without decoration. She had the build of someone who had grown up doing physical work and had not stopped. Her hands were capable, and her eyes were brown and observant, and she had the quality that Lena had spent her whole life searching for in other people and rarely found. She treated the person in front of her as though they were exactly as capable as they actually were. Not more, not less, just that. She had wrapped the ankle with the kind of authority that came from having done it many times. She had assessed the injury through touch and movement, the same tests Lena had done herself, and had confirmed the same conclusion: ligament damage, no fracture, 24 to 48 hours of minimal weight bearing recommended. "You walked on it today," she said, not accusatory, just noting. "We needed to move," Lena said. Petra looked at the bandage she had applied. "You did reasonable damage control with the strip wrapping. The swelling progression would have been worse without it." Lena said nothing. "Did you do the pine needle broth?" Petra said. Lena glanced toward the main room, where Kale had gone when they arrived. "Yes." Petra followed the direction of the glance without comment. "It helps with the inflammation. I will make a proper preparation tonight, more concentrated than whatever the fire produced." She finished the wrapping and handed Lena a proper boot to replace her worn one. The station kept a supply of standard sizes, and Lena laced it on and tested the support and found it significantly better than what she had been working with. "The food is in the main room," Petra said. "He is already eating, which is unusual. He generally waits." Lena looked at her. Petra's expression was perfectly level. Lena went to the main room. Kale was seated at the table, eating from a bowl with the same economy of motion that characterized everything he did. He glanced up when she entered. She took the chair across from him, and Petra came in behind her and set a bowl in front of her and left again. The food was a thick broth with pieces of dried meat and root vegetables that had clearly been soaking and then simmered for the hours since Kale's signal had reached the station that morning. It was hot in the particular way that deeply hot food is when your body has been cold for days. Not just warm on the tongue, but warm all the way down. A spreading heat that worked its way through her from the inside out. She ate. He ate. They did not speak for several minutes. From outside, she could hear the wind picking up again. Not the brief snow of the morning, but a sustained wind that moved through the trees around the station with a continuous low voice. The fire in the main room was a large one, built in a proper stone hearth, and it cast everything in steady orange gold that was a different quality of warmth than the campfires she had lived beside for the past 4 days. "Tell me about Northmere," she said. He looked up. "What specifically?" he said. "The structure of it," she said. "How it operates. The council. How large is it? How are decisions escalated to you?" He looked at her for a moment, with the calibrating expression she had come to recognize. "Why?" he said. She set down her spoon. "Because you spent 4 days in the Deadwood alone over a territorial framework that involves at least 3 packs and 1 disputed resource. That means the council either did not know you were here, which seems unlikely, or they knew and accepted it, which tells me something about how your authority functions. I want to understand which." He looked at his bowl. "Both," he said. "They knew I was conducting a boundary assessment. They did not know I had made physical entry into the unclaimed zone." She absorbed this. "They would not have approved that," she said. "No," he said. "Why?" "Risk," he said. "The Alpha King alone in disputed territory, without escort, is a risk the council considers unacceptable, regardless of the tactical value." She thought about this. "And you considered the tactical value sufficient. The presence of an Alpha King in the disputed zone sends a different message than the presence of scouts," he said. "It says the matter is taken seriously, at the highest level, without requiring a formal declaration of interest. It is harder to interpret as aggression. It is harder to counter politically." She picked up her spoon. "It is also harder to explain if it goes wrong," she said. "Yes," he said. She ate. He ate. "Your council," she said. "They are loyal to you?" "To the Federation," he said. "Which is not always the same thing." She noted the precision of that distinction. "There is tension. There are people with different views on how the Federation should be governed, he said. That is normal in any healthy structure. And people with views on when the Alpha King should involve himself directly in field operations versus delegating to his lieutenants. He looked at her. Yes, he said. She thought about the Ashen Ridge Scouts. About the quiet, deliberate way Cale had moved through the Deadwood for 5 days with no support and no backup, relying entirely on his own judgment and whatever signal system he had with his people. She thought about the howl, the sound that had cleared the forest of 2 armed fighters in under 30 seconds. The most feared Alpha King alive, she said. That is what they call you outside Northmere. He said nothing. Do you find it useful? She said. The reputation. He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he said. And sometimes the reputation requires maintenance. And maintenance is expensive. She thought about what maintenance might mean, in the context of a reputation that was built on something specific enough that 2 trained fighters had retreated from a sound. The cost of it, she said. Is it worth what it buys? He turned his bowl slightly in his hands. It was the first fidgeting gesture she had seen him make, and she noted it with the attention she gave to everything in this man that departed from the norm. The cost is paid, he said. Whether it is worth it is not a question I can answer usefully. She looked at him. Why not? She said. Because I cannot compare it against the alternative, he said. I do not know what the Northern Territories look like without the last 11 years. I only know what they look like with them. She thought about this, about what it meant to live inside a decision so large you could not see its edges. Petra came in, set a different cup beside Lena's bowl. The pine needle preparation, she assumed from the smell, and left again. Lena drank it. It was indeed more concentrated than the camp version, and considerably worse. She finished it anyway. Your pack, Cale said. She looked at him. Coldmere, he said. How long did they plan the banishment? She set down the cup. 3 days, she said. That was how long I had known it was coming. I do not know how long they had been planning before that. And no one warned you. No. He was quiet. The Omega rank, he said. In Coldmere. It is hereditary or assigned. Assessed, she said. At 7, during the first formal evaluation, and again at 14. I failed both. He looked at her. She returned the look without flinching. What does failing mean? He said. Concretely. Low score on the physical strength assessment, she said. Below average on the endurance test. Top score on the tracking component, which counted for very little. Above average on the reasoning assessment, which counted for less than the physical. And none of that changed the ranking. Ranking is set at 14 and does not change, she said. Omega ranking carries specific restrictions, limited resource allocation, specific work assignments, reduction in formal authority within pack decisions. She paused. It also carries social weight that the formal structure does not enumerate, but that exists more reliably than any written rule. They excluded you, he said. Systematically, she said. He looked at the fire. She watched him look at it. The Deadwood, he said. They used it as a disposal site. Not officially, she said. There is no official policy of lethal banishment. The decree was banishment to the boundary. What happens at the boundary is not enumerated. They knew what would happen, he said. It was not a question. It had the specific flatness of a statement about something that made him angry, and the anger was recognizable to her, precisely because it was contained, not absent, not performed, just held. Yes, she said. He said nothing else. She did not either. After a moment, she looked around the room at the station. The walls, the supplies, the organized, purposeful space that spoke of something cared for and maintained over time. You keep this station stocked year-round, she said. Yes, he said. For situations like this one. For situations that require a resource in this location, he said. What the situation is varies. She thought about that, about the forethought of it, the quiet, unglamorous work of maintaining something you might need, in a place you might need it, for a purpose you could not entirely predict. She picked up the flat stone from where she had set it on the table. She turned it once. She set it down again. Cale, she said. He looked at her. What happens now? She said. Not tonight. After. After the ankle is healed and the boundary situation is resolved, what happens to me? He was very still for a moment. What do you want to happen? He said. She looked at him. Nobody had asked her this before. Not ever. Not once in 22 years. She did not have an answer. Not a complete one. She had pieces of an answer. She did not want to go back to a place that had used the deadwood as a solution to a problem that was, in fact, her. She did not want to live as the thing everyone was careful not to look directly at. She did not want to go back to counting things to stay calm. She said, I want to be somewhere I can be useful. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without decoration. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, we will talk about it when the ankle is healed. It was not an answer. It was not a dismissal. It was exactly what it was, a deferral to when the immediate practical problem was resolved, so that the next conversation could happen on solid ground. She nodded. She looked at the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with its long, low voice. Inside, the warmth held. She reached for the flat stone. She did not pick it up this time. She just set her hand flat on the table beside it and let her fingers rest against its edge. That was enough. She slept for 14 hours. She did not know this until she woke and found the light in the window had shifted completely, and Petra was moving in the main room, with the specific quality of someone who has been around a long time and learned to move quietly. Lena lay still for a moment and took inventory. Ankle wrapped and elevated on a bolster someone had placed while she slept. Fire in the room still burning steadily, which meant it had been tended. Body warm and aching in the specific way that comes from genuine rest after prolonged cold stress. She sat up. The room she had been given was small and contained exactly what it needed. A bed frame with a thick mattress, a chest for clothes, a window facing northeast. She went to the window. The deadwood was just visible as a dark line on the southern horizon, maybe 2 kilometers away. Between the station and the tree line, the snow lay clean and unmarked in the morning light. She dressed and went to the main room. Petra was at the table with papers and a cup of something hot. She looked up when Lena entered. 14 hours, Petra said. I know, Lena said. That is what your body needed, Petra said, not a criticism. Lena found the water basin and washed her hands and face. Kale, she said. Out, Petra said. He left at dawn. Communication with the council. She absorbed this. Something in the deadwood had changed while she slept, then. Or Kale had made a decision about timing. The Ashen Ridge situation? She said. Partially, Petra said. And a report from his counsel about an internal matter. She paused. He asked me to tell you. Lena looked at her. His third lieutenant has raised a formal objection, Petra said. About the boundary zone approach. Kale's solo presence in the unclaimed zone without council approval. She sat down. He is being formally challenged, Lena said. Not challenged, Petra said carefully. Questioned. There is a distinction in Northmere's governance structure. A formal question requires a formal answer. Kale must appear before the full council within 3 days to address it. And me? Lena said. Petra's expression did not change exactly, but something in it moved. His presence in the deadwood produced one outcome the council did not anticipate, Petra said. You. Lena looked at the flat stone on the table where she had left it. They want to know what to do with me, she said. They want to know what Kale intends to do with you, Petra said, which is a somewhat different question. She thought about what that distinction meant. In pack governance, the Alpha King's personal decisions carried weight that was different from official council decisions. The council could question his methods. They could not easily question his personal authority over individual situations within his territory. What does he intend? She said. I don't know, Petra said. He does not generally share his intentions with me before he has decided them. But you have known him long enough to make a reasonable guess. Petra looked at her steadily. Yes, she said, I have. She did not offer the guess. Lena let it be. She ate the food that Petra had set out, a proper meal, the kind that reminded her body what food was for. She ate slowly and thoroughly. She thought about the council. She thought about what it meant to be a point of contention in someone else's political structure. She had been a point of contention in Coldmere her whole life, The problem that the pack structure could not elegantly solve. The Omega who did not perform Omega in the ways the ranking required. She understood what it felt like to be the complication in the room. She did not want to be Kale's complication. She wanted to be useful. The door to the station opened. Cold air came in ahead of him, and then he came in behind it and closed the door, and stood for a moment unwrapping the outer layer of his coat. He had been outside for several hours. His face was reddened from the cold, and his eyes had the focused quality of someone who had been doing something that required sustained attention. He saw that she was awake. "Good," he said. Not warmly, not coldly, just noted. He sat down. She said, "Petra told me about the council question." He looked at her. "She said you asked her to," Lena said. "Yes," he said. She waited. "We leave for the Northmere council seat tomorrow morning," he said. "If the ankle will carry you." "The ankle will carry me," she said. He looked at it briefly. She had rewrapped it herself this morning, and her boot was on. "The journey is 2 days," he said. "We will have escort from the boundary station. 4 of my people." "Because the council will be watching the approach," she said. "Because the council is always watching," he said. "And because 4 people is the minimum I will accept, after what Petra told me this morning about the Ashen Ridge movements overnight." She looked up. "They crossed the boundary line," he said. 2 scouts, north of the unclaimed zone. They retreated before our people could engage, but they crossed." She thought about this, about what it meant in the context of the framework he had been protecting, about the signal it sent. "They are escalating," she said. "Yes," he said, "which means the council question about my methods is poorly timed." She thought about the lieutenant who had raised the formal question, about the political landscape Kale was navigating, not just external territory disputes but internal authority questions, simultaneously, in a 3-day window. "Who is the lieutenant?" she said. "The one who raised the question." He was quiet for a moment. "His name is Dennis," Kale said. "He has served on the council for 7 years. He is not disloyal. He is cautious. And he believes my methods in the field are inconsistent with the risk profile a federation of our size should accept." She absorbed this. "Is he wrong?" Kale looked at her. "In general," she continued, "is he wrong about the risk profile?" A pause. "No," Kale said. "In general, he is not wrong." She thought about that. About a man who could say that about the person challenging his methods. "Then the question before the council is not whether he is right," she said. "It is whether the specific situation justified the deviation from the acceptable risk profile. And you will need to make that case." "Yes," he said. "With evidence that the boundary situation required direct observation at the highest level, and that the outcome," she paused, "including whatever outcome I represent, constitutes meaningful intelligence that justified the approach." He looked at her for a long moment. "You understand political process," he said. "I understand what I have observed," she said. "Whether that translates to council procedure in Northmere I do not know." "It does," he said. "More directly than you might expect." She turned the flat stone once in her hand. "Kale," she said, "you are going to walk into a council session and defend an unplanned solo operation in disputed territory. Whatever value I represent needs to be clear and defensible. What is it?" He was quiet. "What I observed in the unclaimed zone," he said. "The extent of the Ashen Ridge encroachment, their scout deployment patterns, the fact that they are moving on the spring resource." He paused. "None of that was in the intelligence reports my council had before I left." "So the intelligence value is real," she said. "Yes." She nodded. "Then that is the case," she said. "You went because the intelligence was insufficient. You stayed because what you found exceeded what the scouts had reported. You came back through the boundary with a Coldmere citizen who had been illegally deposited in disputed territory by a pack with no authority over that zone, which constitutes a secondary territorial violation by Coldmere that the Federation now has a legitimate interest in documenting." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Is any of that not accurate?" she said. "No," he said. "It is all accurate." "Then it is a strong case," she said. "Especially the third point. A Coldmere pack using the unclaimed zone as a disposal ground is a territorial matter, not just a personal one. The Federation has standing." He was still looking at her. She picked up the cup that Petra had refilled and drank from it. "I did not see it in those terms," he said. It was not an admission. It was a plain statement. "You were in the middle of it," she said. "Things in the middle of them are harder to frame." He looked at the fire. Then he looked at her again. "Why did they do it?" he said. "Coldmere, what made you worth disposing of?" She had expected the question. She had been waiting for it since the fire on the first night. She answered it the way she had learned to answer the things that had most weight, briefly, with no padding around the edges. "I was inconvenient," she said. "I did not fit the structure. I did not perform weakness in the ways the ranking required. I was too aware, and too direct, and I made the people responsible for maintaining the ranking structure uncomfortable." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was even. "The elder who read the decree." "Harrow," she said. "He will be informed that the Northmere Federation has formal notice of the incident and is logging it as a territorial matter." She looked at him. "I am not telling you this to produce a particular reaction," he said. "I am telling you because you should know what the formal position of the Federation will be." She held his gaze. She felt something she did not have an immediate name for. Not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was what you felt for gifts. This was something different. The feeling of someone taking seriously a thing that everyone else had spent 22 years treating as irrelevant. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. And something between them settled, quiet and without ceremony, like snow covering the ground, not transforming it, just covering it, just placing a new surface over the old one that was clean and unmarked, and had not yet had anything asked of it. She looked at the north-facing window. Tomorrow they would go to Northmere. She did not know what she would find there. She held the flat stone in both hands and looked at the clean snow outside the window, and thought that for the first time in many years, not knowing what came next, felt less like falling, and more like standing at the edge of something that simply had not yet begun. She could manage not yet. Not yet was enough. They left at first light. The escort Cale had mentioned arrived before dawn. 4 people who appeared at the station door, with the quiet efficiency of those who had been doing this kind of work long enough that preparation was invisible. 3 men and a woman. They introduced themselves in a single round of names. Lena committed all 4 immediately. Owen, the tallest, with the specific stillness of someone trained to be the last line. Clara, the woman, who had the eyes of a person who was always measuring distances. Finn, dark-haired and young, who moved with more energy than the others but channeled it precisely. And Aldrich, who said nothing at all but whose presence in the group was like the bass note in a chord. Not dominant, but everything would have been incomplete without it. They did not ask about Lena. They acknowledged her with the same directness they used on each other. A look, a nod, a brief evaluation that was not hostile but was honest. She understood she was being assessed for practical factors. How much would she slow them? What did her injury limit? What did she know how to do? She met each assessment without performance. Petra had restocked Lena's supplies, a proper pack now, not the coat pocket arrangement she had been running on. New gloves, a scarf. The medical wrap on her ankle had been refreshed, and she had been given a brace, in addition to the wrap, that reduced the lateral movement of the joint and would allow her to sustain a longer pace, with less risk of the same instability that had taken her down 2 days ago. She had said goodbye to Petra in the way that is honest between people who may or may not see each other again, but who have no uncertainty about how they feel about each other's competence. "The stone," Petra had said, glancing at Lena's pocket. "I know," Lena had said. Petra had almost smiled. It was the closest she came. Now Lena walked in a group for the first time since leaving Coldmere. The formation was natural and unspoken. Owen and Clara in front, reading the trail. Finn on the left flank. Aldrich behind Lena and to the right. Cale walked slightly ahead of the main group, which was not because he was distancing himself from it, but because it was where his particular kind of awareness was most useful. Forward-facing, reading the landscape, making small route decisions that the rest of them executed without question. She fit herself into the formation without being shown how. She had been fitting herself into spaces she was not designed for her entire life. The landscape north of the boundary station was different from the Deadwood, in the specific way that territories under active stewardship are different from unclaimed land. Not more beautiful. The Deadwood had a beauty that was entirely its own, the kind that does not require maintenance, but different. There were tracks through the snow that were not animal tracks. Pathways that had been used enough times to have a particular compression, a slight hollowing, that persisted even under new snow. The trees here had been managed in ways you could see if you knew how to look. Selective thinning that allowed light to reach the lower growth, removal of deadfall that would otherwise create fire risk. Small things, but accumulated evidence of something cared for over time. She noticed these things and filed them. The first hour passed without incident. The second hour brought them to the edge of a frozen lake that she had not known existed, a wide, flat expanse of silver white that opened up as they came through the tree line. The lake was beautiful in the specific way that winter lakes are, which is the beauty of a thing that has removed everything soft from itself and become purely structural. The far shore was a low, dark line, with the northern mountains rising behind it. They crossed the lake. She tested the ice before each step, old habit from the stream crossings of the last week, and it was solid, thick in the way that deep winter ice is, built up over months. Their footsteps were almost soundless on it. Halfway across, Clara dropped back to walk beside her. She said, "The ankle is holding." "Yes," Lena said. Clara looked forward. "Cale said you managed the slope section south of the boundary." "Yes," Lena said. "That section took out one of our scouts last winter," Clara said. "Both legs." Lena looked at her. Clara returned the look with an expression that was not quite approval, but was something adjacent. "The brace will help today," Clara said. "But at the end of the day, you will need to elevate it again, or you will pay for tomorrow." "I know," Lena said. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Clara said, "The council session. Do you know what you are walking into?" "I know what Cale has told me," Lena said. "A formal question about his methods. I understand the territorial aspects." "There is more," Clara said. She was not looking at Lena. She was looking ahead, toward Cale's figure at the front of the group. "Dennis's formal question is procedural, but the substance behind it is not." Lena waited. "Dennis represents a faction on the council that has been arguing for a different structure," Clara said. "Not an overthrow, nothing like that, but a formalization of authority, a written protocol for alpha decisions, checks and balances." She paused. "They have been building the case for 2 years. Cale's solo Deadwood operation gave them the clearest example they have had." Lena thought about this. "And Cale knows this," she said. "Cale knows everything that happens in his council chamber," Clara said. "He does not always address it immediately. He waits until the moment when addressing it is most useful." "Which is now," Lena said. "Which might be now," Clara said. "Or he might wait further. I cannot always predict him." She thought about the man walking ahead of them, about the weight of final decisions, about the specific discipline required to be the kind of leader who waits. "Does Dennis have support?" she said. "Yes," Clara said. 3 council members who vote with him consistently. 4 more who are persuadable depending on the specific issue. "And Cale's support?" "Stronger," Clara said, "but not unassailable." She absorbed this. "And me," she said. "From the council's perspective, what am I?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "An unknown quantity," she said, "which in council politics is its own category." Lena thought about that. They reached the far shore of the lake and re-entered the trees, and the formation adjusted again. The mountains ahead were closer now, and the terrain began to slope upward, in long, gradual risings that would build through the afternoon toward the higher ground where the Northmere Council seat was built. She thought about walking into a room full of people who did not know what she was, and whose first reading of her would determine a great deal. She had spent her entire life being read badly by rooms full of people. She was, in some sense, extremely well prepared for this. At midday they stopped by a stream, running slightly at its center, the bank ice thick and opaque, and ate briefly and rested for 20 minutes. Lena elevated the ankle on her pack and worked her hands to restore circulation. Cale sat nearby on a fallen log and did not appear to rest but existed in the particular alert stillness that was, she had learned, his version of it. She said, "Clara told me about Dennis." He looked at her. "Not the details," she said, "the shape of it." He nodded. "Is there anything you need me to do or not do in the council session?" she said. He was quiet. "Be what you are," he said. "Do not perform anything, Do not explain yourself more than the direct question requires. She looked at him. When they ask you why you were in the unclaimed zone, he said, tell them, plainly. No deflection. What will they make of that? She said. I do not know, he said. That is why I want to hear it. She understood. She was not being set up. She was being given the space to be exactly what she was, in front of people who would draw their own conclusions, because Cale had found those conclusions worth knowing. She drank from her water bottle. She looked at the mountains ahead. How large is the council? She said. 11 members, he said, including Dennis. And you chair it. I lead it, he said. There is a formal chair who is not me, Counselor Webb. She has held the position for 14 years. She is neutral in the best sense of the word. She cares about process rather than outcome. Does she like you? Lena said. He considered this. She respects what I have built, he said. She finds some of my methods uncomfortable. Does she like Dennis? No, he said. She finds his political ambitions transparent. Lena filed this. They moved on. The afternoon was the hardest stretch of the journey, the terrain rising steadily, the pack growing heavy toward the end of the day, as the body's reserves started to feel the length of the travel. Her ankle was at its edge again, the same careful position it had been at when they crossed the Ashen Ridge boundary yesterday. She managed it. She paced herself. She stopped once to tighten the brace, and Owen, without looking at her, slowed the group's pace by 10% in the next section without being asked to. She noted this. It told her something about how the escort operated, the kind of shared understanding that came from working together for a long time. She thought about what it would mean to be part of something like that. They arrived at the overnight waypoint, a larger facility than the boundary station, set into the hillside with several rooms and a proper kitchen, staffed by 2 people who had food ready and water heating. The warmth hit her in the doorway the same way it had at the boundary station. That night they ate at a long table, all 6 of them, and it was the first time she had sat at a communal meal since Coldmere, and it was nothing like a Coldmere meal. There was no hierarchy at the table. There was no seating arrangement that placed the weakest at the end. There was just people eating and the occasional brief exchange of information, and the comfortable silence of those who have spent a day in the same direction and do not need to justify it to each other. Finn said, at one point, "You really crossed that ravine in the Deadwood, with that ankle." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "How?" he said. "Slowly," she said. He thought about this. "Fair enough," he said, and went back to his food. Later, when the meal was finished and people were settling toward sleep, Lena sat by the fire with the flat stone in her hand and thought about tomorrow. Tomorrow the council. Tomorrow a room full of people who would decide what to make of her, and she could not control what they decided, only what she showed them. She would show them what she was, no more, no less. Her grandmother had told her once that the most powerful thing a person could do in a room that was trying to make them small was to take up the exact space they were owed, and not 1 inch less. She did not know yet how much space she was owed in Northmere's council chamber. She would find out. She turned the stone. Once. Twice. She put it in her pocket. She went to sleep. The council chamber was stone. She had expected something more formal, carved wood perhaps, or metal fittings, the kind of visible investment in authority that pack leadership often expressed through its spaces. Northmere's chamber was stone floors, stone walls, high stone ceiling with narrow windows, letting in the winter light in pale strips. It was cold in a way the fires at either end of the room only partially addressed. It was functional and undecorated, and it told you that what happened here was work, not ceremony. 11 chairs arranged in a horseshoe. The formal chair, Webb's, at the open end of the horseshoe, facing the center. Cale did not sit with the council. He stood at the room's center when he addressed it, which Lena had not expected, and which told her something about how authority was structured here that was different from anything she had seen in Coldmere. She sat on a bench along the far wall with Clara beside her. She looked at the council members as they filed in. She read them the way she had always read rooms, not by what people said first, but by where they sat relative to each other, how they arranged themselves, who checked who before speaking. Dennis she identified before anyone said his name. He was perhaps 50, compact, with an organized face. the kind of face that had made many decisions and wore the efficiency of that on its surface. He sat 3 positions left of center, and he looked at Cale when Cale entered the room, and the look was direct and assessing, and contained no hostility, which told her the hostility, if it existed, was somewhere underneath. Webb was a woman of perhaps 60, with gray hair cut close to her head, and an expression of absolute procedural calm. She acknowledged Cale's entrance, acknowledged the room, acknowledged the agenda. Then she said, in a voice that was used to carrying clearly through stone, "We are here on the matter of the formal question raised by Councillor Dennis, regarding the Alpha King's boundary assessment operations in the unclaimed zone. Councillor Dennis will present the question." Dennis stood. He was good. Lena assessed this in the first 3 minutes. He was clear, he was precise, and he was fair, which was more dangerous than unfairness would have been, because fairness sounded like reason, and reason was hard to argue against without looking defensive. He laid out the issue in clean sequence: the risk posed by the Alpha King's unsupported presence in disputed territory, the absence of prior council notification, the vulnerability it created in the Federation's leadership continuity, and the need, going forward, for a formal protocol covering field decisions at the Alpha level. He was not wrong. She had known he would not be. He finished, and sat. Webb looked at Cale. Cale addressed the room from the center. He did not use notes. He did not move. He stood still. The same stillness she had come to recognize, and he answered Dennis's points in the same order Dennis had raised them, with the same precision, and without defensiveness. He acknowledged the risk. He acknowledged the absence of notification. He explained the intelligence gap that had motivated the solo approach, and the specific value of the presence in the unclaimed zone. He was also good. She had known he would be. What she had not fully known, until she saw it, was how he handled the room. Not the content, the room itself. The way he looked at each council member in turn, not to perform engagement, but because he was genuinely reading them as he spoke, adjusting in real time to what he was seeing in their faces, without ever making it obvious that he was doing so. She stored everything. Then Webb said, "The matter of the individual found in the unclaimed zone. The council will hear her directly." Clara touched her arm briefly. Not reassurance, just notation. Lena stood. She walked to the center of the room. She stood where Cale had stood. She looked at the council. She said her name. She said where she was from. She said plainly and in chronological order what had happened. The banishment, the days in the Deadwood, the scouts, the fall into the ravine, the meeting with Cale. She did not add color. She did not explain her feelings. She stated what had occurred. Dennis asked, "Why were you in the unclaimed zone rather than the Coldmere territory boundary?" "I walked north to find high ground," she said. "I did not know precisely where the boundary between Coldmere's edge and the unclaimed zone was. I followed the most defensible terrain." "You had survival skills," he said, "above what would be expected of an Omega ranking." "Yes," she said. "Where did you acquire them?" "My grandmother taught me," she said, "before she died." A brief pause in the room. "And the Ashen Ridge Scouts," another council member said. A woman on the right side of the horseshoe. "You engaged them verbally." "Yes," she said. "To what end?" "To hold their attention and make myself appear less manageable than I was," she said. "I needed time." "Did it work?" the woman said. "It was working," Lena said. And then Cale arrived, and it became irrelevant. Something shifted in the quality of the room's silence. Dennis said, "In your account of the Alpha King's conduct in the unclaimed zone, was there any moment in which you felt his behavior placed you at risk?" She looked at Dennis. She considered the question with the care it deserved. "No," she said. "His behavior, at every point, was protective of my safety, without creating dependency on his intervention. He provided resources. He offered relevant information. He made no decisions for me that I was capable of making for myself." Dennis looked at her steadily. "That is a specific evaluation," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is accurate." He considered this. "Thank you," he said. She returned to the bench. The council deliberated. It was a formal process. Webb managed it precisely, each member speaking in turn. No interruptions, no side conversations. She listened and learned the room. The 3 who voted consistently with Dennis made their views clear. They supported the formal protocol proposal. 4 others expressed support for Kale's position, that field judgment must retain flexibility. The remaining 4 were in the middle in different ways. The discussion moved to the Ashen Ridge boundary crossing. The tone of the room changed. Suddenly the question was not what Kale had done, but what was being done to the Federation's borders, and the internal political calculus shifted under that weight, in ways she could see happening in real time. The council members who had been focused on process were now focused on territory. Dennis, to his credit, adapted immediately. He was not inflexible, she could see that. He shifted his argument from the problem of the past operation to the need for a clear framework for the immediate response. The Ashen Ridge crossing this morning confirms the intelligence Kale retrieved from the unclaimed zone, Dennis said. The question is not whether the intelligence was valuable, it is whether this method should be systematized or remain exceptional. Webb said, Counselor Dennis's proposal. Dennis said, a formal field operations protocol. Tier 1 through 3 decisions can be made independently. Tier 4 and above, which includes operations with exposure at the alpha level in contested zones, require council notification within 6 hours of initiation. 6 hours, Kale said from the center of the room. Not prior approval. Notification, Dennis said. Not approval. You retain the decision authority. The council has the information. Silence. Webb looked at Kale. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, accepted. The room was very still. Dennis blinked. He had expected a longer fight. Accepted with one amendment, Kale said. The 6-hour window applies in communication possible zones. In zones where communication is not reliably possible, the unclaimed territory being an example, the window extends to 24 hours from the boundary crossing point. Dennis looked at him. That is reasonable, Dennis said. Then we have an agreement, Kale said. Webb called the formal vote. 9-2 in favor. The 2 who voted against were doing so on other grounds. Lena read it in their faces. Not on the substance of the agreement, but on the speed of the resolution, which had moved faster than their preference, and had left them without room to raise the additional points they had prepared. This was a Kale tactic, she understood. Agree before the opposition can fully deploy. Take the ground before they realize you have moved. She filed it. The session continued into the early afternoon with the Ashen Ridge situation. Plans were made, positions assigned, letters drafted. She sat on the bench and listened, and was quiet, and learned the room, and learned the people in it, and stored everything. At the end, Webb closed the session. People dispersed. Dennis crossed the room, and stopped in front of Lena. She looked at him. He said, Your account of the Alpha King's conduct. Yes, she said. It was balanced, he said. I expected it to be partial. He told me to be what I am, she said. Not to perform anything. Dennis absorbed this. He told you that, he said. It was not quite disbelief, more like a recalibration. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a moment. What are you going to do, he said, now that you are here? She thought about this. Be useful, she said, in whatever way the situation allows. Dennis looked at her for a long moment. The territorial law point, he said, that Coldmere's use of the unclaimed zone as a disposal site constitutes a secondary violation. That was yours. She said nothing. I have been arguing boundary law for 11 years, he said. I missed it. She said, you were focused on the Alpha's methods. You had too much on the table. He looked at her. Something in his expression had changed. He was not, she understood, seeing an Omega from Coldmere anymore. He said, Welcome to Northmere. He walked away. She looked at the empty council chamber, the pale winter light coming through the high, narrow windows, crossing the stone floor in long strips, the fires at either end of the room, burning steadily into the cold. Kale came to stand beside her. She looked at the room. Dennis, she said, he is not what I expected. No, Kale said, he rarely is. She thought about what had happened in this room, about the protocol that had been agreed, and what it meant, and what had made it possible, about the territorial law point that had shifted the room. The Coldmere violation, she said. Will it go somewhere? A formal notification to the Coldmere Alpha, he said. and a request for a clarification of their standing relationship to the unclaimed zone. She thought about Elder Harrow writing a response to a formal notification from Northmere Federation. He will not meet anyone's eyes when he reads it, she said, mostly to herself. Kale looked at her. She did not explain. She looked at the stone floor of the chamber. She reached into her pocket. She did not take the stone out, she just held it there, feeling its weight, its smooth, familiar edge. She had walked into this room from a bench on the wall. She had stood in the center of it. She had said what was true, plainly, without decoration. And it had been enough. It had been, for the first time she could remember, exactly enough. The notification went out to Coldmere on the third day. She did not write it, and she did not ask to see it before it was sent. She had given Kale the factual account of the banishment and the circumstances around it, the date, the public nature of the ceremony, Elder Harrow's role, the specific decree as she remembered it, and she had left the formal language to the people who knew what formal language was supposed to do. She spent the third day learning the building. The Northmere Council seat was larger than she had expected, and organized in ways that reflected something she was coming to recognize as Kale's character. Everything was where it was for a reason that was legible, once you looked for it. The supply stores were organized by urgency of use, not category. The communication room was positioned to receive light from the east in the morning, when the primary traffic came in from the outer boundary stations. The kitchens were on the warmest interior wall. None of this was accidental. She found the library on the second floor. It was a proper library, not large, but well considered. The territorial law section she went to first, and she spent 2 hours there, reading Northmere's boundary agreements and the formal doctrine around unclaimed zones. She moved from there to the council records, which were kept in a separate case and required a specific access, which she asked Clara about. Clara said, "Ask Webb." She found Webb in the administrative corridor, carrying a stack of papers with the focused energy of someone managing several things simultaneously. She stopped when she saw Lena. "The council records," Lena said. "I would like access to the Ashen Ridge boundary history, the last 5 years." Webb looked at her. "Why?" she said, not suspiciously. With the same procedural clarity she applied to everything. "Because the boundary crossing yesterday was not the first," Lena said. "If the pattern goes back 5 years, there is a case for formal escalation that is stronger than a single incident. And if the pattern is new, that tells you something different about the timing and who is driving the decision internally." Webb looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Room 4, second case on the left. The records are organized by year." Lena said, "Thank you." "You are welcome," Webb said, and continued down the corridor. She spent the afternoon in room 4. The pattern was there. She found it in the third year's records, not boundary crossings, but marker displacement. Small movements, each individually within the range that could be attributed to error or weather, but accumulated across 3 years. In the same directional vector, they told a story. The spring had been the target for longer than anyone in Northmere had formally acknowledged. The movements had been careful, slow enough to avoid triggering a formal response, fast enough to cover significant ground over 3 years. She made notes. She brought the notes to Kale that evening. He looked at them for a long time. He said, "Webb had this information." "Parts of it," Lena said, "but not assembled this way. The individual records are in different folders, different years. You would need to overlay them to see the accumulation." He looked at the pattern she had mapped. He was quiet for several minutes. She waited. "This changes the council's response options," he said. "Yes," she said. "A 3-year systematic displacement pattern is not a territorial dispute. It is a sustained strategic operation. The response tools available for those 2 things are different." He set down the notes. He looked at her. She met the look. "Where did you learn to do this?" he said. She thought about the answer. "I learned to read what was not being said," she said. "I learned to find information in the gaps between what people reported and what was actually happening. I did it in Coldmere for 22 years, because it was the only way to understand what was happening to me." He was quiet. "And now you are applying it to Ashen Ridge's boundary records," he said. "The skill does not change," she said, "only the subject." He looked at the notes again. "I will present this to the council tomorrow morning," he said. She nodded. She started to stand. Lena, he said. She stopped. He was looking at the notes, not at her. What you said in the chamber, he said, about my conduct in the unclaimed zone. She waited. That I made no decisions for you, that you were capable of making yourself, he said. Was that diplomatic or accurate? She looked at him. Accurate, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. She left him with the notes and the fire, and the thing she had built for him, which was not gratitude, and was not loyalty, and was not any of the things she had been trained to offer in exchange for being tolerated. It was work. It was useful work. And it was hers. She went to her room. She took the flat stone from her pocket. She set it on the windowsill, where the morning light would reach it first. Outside, Northmere was cold and dark and very large, and she had been here 4 days, and she had found the library and the council records and a 3-year pattern that everyone had missed. And Dennis had told her welcome to Northmere without irony, and Clara had dropped her pace without being asked, and Cale had said good in a voice that meant something by it. She looked at the stone. Well, she said to it, quietly. The stone said nothing. She went to sleep. She did not count anything. She did not need to. Coldmere's emissaries arrived on the 12th day, not because they had been summoned quickly, because it had taken them this long to agree on who to send, which told Lena more about the internal condition of the pack than anything the emissaries would say once they arrived. A healthy pack leadership would have dispatched people within 3 days of receiving a formal notification from a territory with Northmere's standing. The 12-day delay meant that someone had argued about it, more than one someone, and the arguing had taken longer than the urgency required. She found this information useful and stored it. She did not go to the reception when they arrived. This was not a social choice, and it was not fear. It was her own decision, reached after a conversation with Cale 3 days earlier, in which she had explained her reasoning, and he had listened without interrupting. If I am in the room, she had said, they spend the first meeting managing the fact of me. Every diplomatic move they make will be angled around my presence. The point of their visit is to assess the Federation's formal position on the boundary violation and explore what Northmere wants as a resolution. That conversation is more useful without me in it. Cale had looked at her. And when they ask about you, he said, they will ask about me, she had agreed. And the answer to that question will tell you more about what they are actually here for than anything they say about the boundary violation. He had been quiet for a moment. When did you become a political strategist? He said. She had looked at him. I have always been a political strategist, she said. I just had nothing to apply it to. He had looked at her for a long moment with the expression she had come to think of as his real one. Not the still, unreadable face the outside world knew, but the one underneath it, which was more complex and more human and occasionally surprised. He had said, all right. So she was not in the reception room. She was in the library. She was reading the Falcrest Agreement's Water Rights Annex, which Webb had located and provided after Lena's council records session had prompted a broader document review. The annex was, as she had suspected from Cale's confirmation in the Deadwood, a separate document with limited signatories. It was also more nuanced than she had expected. It contained a clause that was either brilliant or deliberately obscure, depending on your position, which allowed for the annex's water rights framework to be activated in any subsequent territorial dispute involving a natural resource within the geographic scope of the original agreement. The spring in the unclaimed zone was within that geographic scope. She read the clause twice and then read it a third time. If she was reading it correctly, and she thought she was, but she was not a trained legal interpreter, and she wanted Webb to look at it, the Ashen Ridge boundary dispute was not just a territorial matter. It was potentially a matter that fell under the Falcrest framework, which meant it had its own resolution mechanism that bypassed standard boundary negotiation. She went to find Webb. Webb was not in her office. She was, Finn told her when she found him in the corridor, in the reception room with the Coldmere emissaries. Lena went back to the library and waited. 40 minutes later, Webb came to her. She had the look of someone who had been managing a room and was glad to be out of it. The Falcrest Water Annex, Lena said. Clause 12. Webb looked at the document Lena held out. She read it. She was quiet for a long time. Yes, she said, finally. That is what I thought, Lena said. If this applies, Webb said. The Ashen Ridge claim on the spring collapses entirely. The framework gives priority access to the closest natural water boundary territory, which is Northmere. Yes, Lena said. This was never interpreted this way before, Webb said. No, Lena said. Because nobody assembled the geographic scope map alongside the annex. They are in different sections of the archive. Webb looked at her. How long have you been in the library? She said. Since my second day here, Lena said. 4 hours a day, approximately. Webb was quiet. Then she said, The Coldmere emissaries. Lena waited. They did not come about the boundary violation, Webb said. Formally, yes. That is the stated purpose of the visit. But the first question they asked, the one they asked before they addressed the boundary matter at all, was about you. Lena had expected this. She had predicted it in her conversation with Kale. But hearing it confirmed was a different thing from predicting it. What specifically? She said. Your status, Webb said. They want to know whether you are here voluntarily or under, their word, protection. She absorbed this. They are worried about what I know, she said. And what you might do with it, Webb said. Yes. She thought about Elder Harrow, about the 12-day deliberation, about the specific word protection, which was designed to make her sound like a vulnerability rather than a person. She said, What was the response? Kale told them you were here as a Northmere Federation guest with full freedom of movement, Webb said, and that the matter of your banishment and the territorial violation by Coldmere were two separate files and would be addressed on separate timelines. Lena thought about this. Separate timelines, she said. Yes, Webb said, which is a way of saying, do not assume the territorial matter will be resolved in a way that eliminates the other matter. They are not connected, except by the fact that they both involve Coldmere. She understood. It was clean. It was precise. It left Coldmere with no lever. And their response? She said. They asked to speak with you, Webb said. She had expected this too. She thought about it. She said, tomorrow, not today, and I want the meeting here, in the library. Webb looked at her. Why the library? She said. Because I want to choose the room, Lena said. Not them. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will arrange it. She left. Lena looked at the Falcrest Annex in her hands. She turned it over. She set it on the table. She thought about Elder Harrow and the two emissaries who had come all this way to determine her status, and found instead a formal notice, a territorial violation file, and a woman who had been spending her mornings in the library. She reached into her pocket. She took out the flat stone. She set it on the table beside the annex. She looked at both of them for a moment. Then she picked the stone up and put it back. The annex she left on the table. That was the one she needed people to see. She met them in the library the next morning. Two emissaries. She had been told their names by Clara the evening before, and she had looked at them when they entered and confirmed the names against the faces. Grant, older, careful, the kind of man who moved through rooms by minimizing his footprint in them, and Nora, younger, sharper, sent to read rather than speak, which was the older trick of the two. Grant was the talker. She already knew what he was going to say. He opened with formality, the proper acknowledgement of Northmere's governance structure, the appropriate recognition of the formal notification, the expression of Coldmere's position regarding the unclaimed zone. It was well constructed, and designed to establish a narrative of misunderstanding rather than intent. She listened to all of it without expression. When he finished, she said, You want to know what I intend to do? He paused. We want to understand the situation, he said. That is not the same question, she said. What you want to know is whether I intend to pursue formal action against Coldmere in connection with the banishment. Nora was watching her very closely. She had not looked away since they sat down. We want to ensure that any misunderstanding can be resolved, Grant said. The banishment decree, Lena said. Was it a misunderstanding? A brief pause. Decisions were made, Grant said. Decisions that, in retrospect, she said, may not have adequately. 12 days to agree on who to send, she said. Not a misunderstanding, an argument about liability. Grant stopped. Nora's expression had not changed. She was reading Lena, with the complete attention of someone who had come here to do exactly this. Lena looked at Grant. "I am not going to tell you what I intend," she said. "Not because I do not know, but because what I intend is not relevant to what the Federation's formal position is. Those are two separate things. Kale told you that. The Alpha King's formal position," Grant said. "We would like to understand the basis for it." "The territorial violation," she said. "Coldmere's use of the unclaimed zone as a disposal site without a formal declaration or cross-border agreement. It is documented in Northmere's boundary records and in my account of the banishment. The basis is procedural. It does not depend on my personal intentions." Grant was quiet. Nora said, the first time she had spoken directly. "Elder Harrow sends his—" "No," Lena said. Nora stopped. "Whatever he sends," Lena said, "do not bring it in here." Nora held her gaze. She did not look away. She did not apologize. After a moment, Nora looked down at the table. Lena looked at Grant. "The Falcrest Water Annex," she said. "Clause 12. She slid the document across the table. "Your legal advisors will want to see this before your next communication with Ashen Ridge." Grant looked at the document. He picked it up slowly. He read Clause 12. Something happened to his face. A brief, controlled movement that he managed but that was not completely invisible. He set the document down. "This is," he said, and stopped. "It is Northmere's," she said. "It has been in their archive since the Falcrest agreement was signed. It has simply not been applied yet." He looked at her. She looked at him. She waited. He said finally, "The Coldmere leadership would like to extend an invitation to—" "No," she said. The word was quiet and complete and did not require expansion. He looked at her. She said, "I am not returning to Coldmere. The invitation is appreciated," and declined. He was very still. "There are people there," he said, carefully, "who expressed concern for your—" "I know who is there," she said. "My answer does not change." He set the document down on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Nora was looking at Lena again, with the same focused attention. But the quality of it had changed. She was not reading for vulnerability anymore. She was reading for something else. Lena looked at Nora. Nora said, "Your mother sends her love." Lena was still. The library was very quiet. She thought about the second row. The face turned slightly to the left. She thought about what her mother had carried all those years, the fear of being too close, the careful rationing of love that might cost something. She thought about 12 years of it, about the fraying bootlace that nobody had helped her replace. She said, "Tell her I am well." Just that. Nothing more. Nora's expression shifted, very slightly. But the shift was real, and it said something about Nora that Grant's entire performance had not, that there was a person behind the reading, and the person had been moved. Grant stood. The meeting was over. He knew it. They left. She sat in the library for a long time after the door closed behind them. The Falcrest Annex was still on the table. She looked at it. She looked at the books around her, all the records, all the accumulated decisions and agreements and disputes that had shaped the Northern Territories over decades. She had read a significant portion of them in 12 days. She was not finished. She picked up the annex. She returned it to its place in the document case. She closed the case. She stood at the window of the library for a moment and looked at the courtyard below, where Finn was crossing with a message in his hand, moving with his characteristic energy. Beyond the courtyard walls, the mountains that she had crossed to get here were white and sharp against the sky. She had crossed those mountains. She had crossed them with a compromised ankle and a walking stick and a flat stone in her pocket. She was not the weakest Omega alive. She was not the weakest anything. She was exactly what she was, which was more than anyone in Coldmere had ever had the patience or the courage to wait for. She left the library. She went to find Kale. He was in the northern courtyard. She had learned that this was where he went when he needed to think, and the thinking required the cold. He was standing at the center of it, looking at the mountains with his hands at his sides, not doing anything, just standing in it. She stopped beside him. "They looked at the mountains," she said. "The emissaries are gone." "I know," he said. Nora will write an accurate report, she said. Grant will frame it diplomatically. The council will get both. Yes, he said. She looked at the mountains. The spring, she said. With Clause 12 confirmed, what does Northmere do next? Webb is drafting the formal invocation, he said. It will go to the Falcrest signatories before Ashen Ridge can respond to the emissary reports. Once the framework is invoked, Ashen Ridge's boundary movements become a violation of a signed agreement rather than a territorial dispute. The response options change significantly. In Northmere's favor, she said. Yes, he said. She nodded. The cold pressed against her face in the way she had come to know, not hostile, just present. She had stopped fighting it somewhere in the deadwood. It was just a condition. Everything had conditions. She said, I want to work on the southern boundary records next. There is a gap in the documentation from 11 years ago that I noticed when I was reading the Ashen Ridge file. The gap corresponds to the period of the Falcrest negotiation. Cale looked at her. You think there is another annex, he said. I think there is something, she said. I will not know until I look. He was quiet for a moment. Webb will give you access, he said. She already does, Lena said. He looked at her. She looked at the mountains. Lena, he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to think of as the real one, the underneath one, the one that was more complex than anything his reputation required of him. He had looked at her this way sometimes over the last 12 days, brief and unguarded, and then gone before it fully arrived. This time it did not go. He said, This is not a temporary situation. She held his gaze. She knew what he meant. Not the work. The work had made itself clear. He meant something else, and she knew he meant something else. And neither of them had addressed it directly, which was a choice she had made, and that he had, she understood now, been respecting. She said, I know. He said, Is that? He stopped. She waited. He said it again, differently. Are you all right with that? She thought about the gathering ground and the fraying bootlace and the flat stone that she had carried through a ravine fall and an icy slope, and 2 days of northern travel, and a council chamber, and a meeting with Coldmere's emissaries. She thought about what she had found in 12 days in a library that nobody had been using well. She thought about Webb saying you are welcome, with the particular warmth of someone who meant it as information rather than courtesy. She thought about Finn saying fair enough, with a whole story behind it. She thought about Nora's face shifting when Lena said tell her I am well, and what that had told her about what love was and was not required to look like. She said, yes. Just that. It was the most complete answer she had. He nodded. They looked at the mountains. The cold was the same cold as always, the kind that had no argument in it, just weight and depth, and the particular honesty of winter, which does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. She thought, I have been in places colder than this, and I did not stop. She thought, this is not the cold that stops you. She reached into her pocket. She took out the flat stone. She turned it once in her palm, feeling the smooth side, the familiar weight. Then she put it back. She looked at the mountains one more time. And then she turned, and went back inside, and went to work. She did not look back. She did not need to. The person who would have looked back had been left in the deadwood, somewhere between the ravine and the way station, somewhere between the counting and the not counting. She was not that person anymore. She was not sure exactly who she was yet. She thought that was fine. She thought she had time. She walked into the building that was not hers yet, and was becoming hers with each day, and the door closed behind her against the cold, and inside it was warm and full of work that wanted doing, and she was the person who could do it, and that was, finally, simply, exactly enough.